Order. All please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Councilmember Shepherd, can you please lead us?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This time I'd ask the city clerk, please take the roll call.
Councilmember Jeans.
Here.
Councilmember Ross.
Here.
Councilmember Holloway.
Here.
Councilmember Mayhew.
Here.
Councilmember Lezay.
Here.
Councilmember Sundwall has requested to be excused. Councilmember Shepherd.
Here.
Mayor Larson.
I am here. May I have a motion and a second to excuse Councilmember Sunwall for this evening?
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to excuse Councilmember Sunwall. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is carried. May I have a motion and a second to approve the agenda for this evening?
Move to approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the agenda as presented. Any discussion, Councilmember Shepherd?
So I'd like to take the warrants off of the consent agenda. And also, can you scroll up? There's one I'd like to take off. Can we see this consent agenda? Okay, I'd like to move AB 19085 off the consent agenda.
Okay.
And I'd also like to add something to the committee of the whole. I'd like to add the ban of consumer fireworks discussion. And I'd also like to talk about the wastewater treatment, the waste management contract, and whether it's still in effect, whether it's expired or not.
Point of procedure, Mayor.
I think, well, those are requests of a number of items. Actually, Councilmember Shepherd, if we could separate those into two motions. One, there's no choice. If one member wants to take off an agenda bill item in the warrants, that comes off. So let's accept those changes. The only one I want moved and debated is whether to add those two discussion items to the committee of the whole.
I didn't hear what she said, so I don't know what they are.
She wants two discussion items regarding the banning of all fireworks in the city of Snoqualmie and the
Consumer, not all fireworks, consumer fireworks.
well, not the commercial ones, obviously, for the show. And then the second is the current status of the waste management contract as to whether it's still in effect.
Okay.
So in those two items, if I could ask the council to discuss or second or whatever. And I'm sorry, did Councilmember Shepherd, did you put that in the form of a motion?
Yes, I'd like to move to have that added to the committee of the whole.
Okay. So just the motion on the two discussion items.
Second.
All right, it's been motion and seconded. Councilmember Ross?
So the fireworks, we would like to discuss it at a future meeting. Councilmember Sunwall was one that I'd also brought up, so I'd like to also hear his comments regarding it. And our Chief Carrera had some additional information that he was putting together, so I don't know that we're prepared tonight to talk about it, but I would like to talk about it in the future.
I mean, I think that was the discussion at the committee, was that Chief Carrera would put some material together on maybe some outreach to the tribe to petition them to not sell illegal fireworks or
Right, and he's
issues
made
like that.
additional ideas, so. if
So
we can-
which meeting do you think we would put it on?
I think we should have information by the next council meeting.
Okay.
Okay, so now it's my point of order. They were motioned together.
I know.
They passed or failed.
I'm going to get back to that. I'm going to get to it right now.
Council member entertained breaking the motion up into two motions by subject.
Look, again, Councilmember Shepherd, you okay to withdraw if the chair of the committee has said that she'll bring that back in the next council meeting, then?
Yes.
Okay, so if we draw the fireworks item, we'll discuss the second one then. The remaining
What was
one
the
is
second
the
item?
current status of the
Current status.
The waste management.
waste management
Contract.
contract.
Oh, I see.
Current status is it remains in effect, and we will explore a 2-year extension letter shortly in the Public Works and Parks Committee. Correct, Bob?
Can we bring that to the committee of the whole to have a discussion?
Well, that's the motion on the floor. I'm just reflecting that, again, the action in regards to waste management is a letter will be forthcoming for a 2-year extension to go to Parks and Public Works. We can discuss it in committee of the whole. I just think it's premature prior to that discussion in committee.
Okay.
Any further discussion before we vote on that, council? Okay. All those in favor of adding that to the committee of the whole tonight? All those opposed?
Aye.
No.
Okay. So we'll take up the fireworks one in a couple weeks, or at least further discussions at the committee, then it can come forward if the committee still chooses to do so. All right, otherwise, the warrants and Agenda Bill 085 have been removed, or 85 moves for, both move down in the agenda. All right, so backing up, Councilmember Mayhew.
I'd like to request that AB 19073 be removed from the consent agenda.
7-3, you said?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. Any further discussion?
Should we move to extend the meeting past 10 o'clock now, or just wait?
I'm sorry?
Should we move to extend the meeting past 10 o'clock, or wait till we get there?
That's a separate motion.
Okay, I withdraw that request.
All right. So with all those changes to the agenda, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's carried. So with that, we move back to public hearings, presentations, proclamations, and appointments. At this time, the public hearing regarding the potential imposition of charges for the city of Snoqualmie's actual cost for providing electronically produced copies of public records allowed by law is now open. There is a sign-up sheet back there, but don't worry if you didn't have a chance to sign up, you'll be given a chance to speak. So can one of the staff, Mark, you're close? Well, okay, Robert's getting it. Just the one for the public hearing on the public records request. You need both of them? Thank you, Mark. Anna Sotelo.
Anna Sotelo, 7117 Almond Avenue Southeast. So like I've mentioned before, I don't see a problem with modeling ourselves more off of other cities like Kirkland. I think that a lot of the cities have done that, and for good reason. But my concerns are, if we're going to make those kind of changes like Kirkland, then we need to also make the kind of changes to be updating our software so that it is easier for our staff to do their job. I know I've brought it up before. I know that our city clerk has confirmed that. I know it's been discussed in our help me out, the Citizens Academy as well. So it's been discussed, it needs to be done. I think it's unfair to make the kind of changes without actually making those kind of changes first. Looking at the goals and objective, and I believe it's goal number 7, improve our communication, understanding, and transparency within city government with those we serve. And I feel to stick to your goal, you really need to have those kind of upgrades before you make these kind of changes. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. William Donaldson.
William Donaldson, 8203 Park Avenue Southeast. Today, we're discussing amendments to the city's public records request policies and billing methods. It's my understanding that the volume of these requests and the commitments city staff has made in recent times and their responses have imposed a strain upon our public resources. Now, in my very limited experience making a request myself, I have been impressed by the professionalism and etiquette with which the city's legal team has carried itself. This strain is not a failure of performance or the result of overabundant requests. It is the consequence of disorder and poor organization. The very nature of these requests and these demands can be traced to a lack of availability. I'm sure it is unnecessary to remind you that this government and these documents are public property. Any attempt made by the government to discourage the public from making document requests by raising fees or adding them, limiting the number of requests available, or imposing Byzantine processes inhibiting access is, in my belief, morally reprehensible and deeply concerning. These documents should be made available for download online and accessible by way of search terms on the city's website. That is the meaning of transparent government in the 21st century, and that is precisely what we need. Thank you.
Thank you, William. Richard Scheel.
Richard Scheel, 6701 West Crestview Loop Southeast. I just have a brief comment at this point about the subject of the public hearing, which is the imposition of fees. I'll have other comments about more generally the rules later. So regarding the fees, in the materials that I submitted today for the meeting, I did identify a couple of things. One was the $67 and something or other per hour fee. There wasn't really anything said about what was that fee based on. And I realize the rules themselves are, they don't have to give all the background, but it sure would be helpful if people knew why is that a reasonable number. To me, it seems like a large number per hour for what is normally a very clerical task taking very little skill. Now, maybe the only people we have available to do it are high-skilled, highly paid people, but it seems like it could be done by very low-skilled people, or, for that matter, volunteers. I personally have volunteered to help and was told there's no need for volunteers, and they didn't want me to come help. But I think there are a lot less expensive ways to do that, and if it's a matter of doing an upload, for instance, you start the upload, and if it takes an hour, you can go off and do other work for that hour, come back and close the upload. And so hopefully we aren't charging for an hour's work for something like that. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Is there anyone else that didn't have a chance to sign up that would like to speak at this time? All right, seeing no one else move forward, public hearing is now closed. We also have a proclamation recognizing that Native Americans who have helped shape the future of the United States through every turn of our history, and whereas Native Americans have served with honor and distinction in the United States Armed Forces and defended the United States of America for more than 200 years, and whereas Native Americans have served in the armed forces with the highest record of military service of any group in the United States, and whereas the courage, determination, and fighting spirit of Native Americans have strengthened and continue to strengthen the United States, including the United States Armed Forces, and whereas the freedoms we enjoy as Americans have been purchased and maintained at a high price throughout our history, and whereas throughout the generations their sacrifices have preserved our unique form of government dedicated to human rights and respect of the individual. Now, therefore, I, Matthew R. Larson, Mayor of the City of Snoqualmie, Washington, on behalf of the citizens, elected officials, and staff, do hereby extend a sincere appreciation of the Native American veterans and urge all citizens to honor our veterans and rededicate themselves to preservation of our liberties under the Constitution. I'm not sure if anybody showed up tonight to receive this. I think members of the tribe or another gentleman that requested this was going to be here, but we thank them for that. All right, moving on to appointments. I, at this time, appoint Stephen Schomer, P.E., as Interim Information Technology Director, replacing P.J., condition on him signing an offer letter. May I have the council confirmation?
Is the motion?
Need a motion and a second, folks.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, a motion and a second to confirm Steve Schomer as our Interim Information Technology Director. Any discussion? Councilmember Mayhew?
Were there some materials in our advance? I don't know anything about this. I've never, other than reading this name, I didn't see anything.
Yeah, I believe that all the council members were provided with a resume or background, were they not?
10 minutes ago.
Jordy said she sent them, and she has just resent them, so they're available now to you. Sorry.
For what it's worth, I received nothing, and so I'm not in a position to vote yes on this. I don't have any opposition. I
Okay.
just don't know anything about this person at all.
I understand, Councilmember Mayhew,
And
yeah.
I prefer to be able to vote yes, but I'm not able to without any knowledge.
So is there any council member that did receive them? I mean, I saw them, I thought I was CC'd on the one that went out a few days ago, but
They went out several.
Councilmember Shepherd?
So I did not read the email if it came to me. My only question is, did we consider more than one person, and how long will they be with us, and what are the terms of the hire?
We did consider more than one. Steve comes highly recommended from a couple different sources, and I do apologize if council has not seen the resume. It was sent out shortly before the meeting started, but I also understand it was sent out on Friday morning, and there is a two-page resume for Steve in the file. But he's got background experience as the Information Technology Director. He was the most recent interim director for the city of Sammamish from February this year through June. And prior to that, he was also with North Shore Utility District as their IT director. He was there for about 18 years. And Steve is actually, Mayor, he's in the audience if you'd like to have him come forth, and he can certainly answer questions from council if they so choose to.
Yeah, I was going to do that. Hold on a sec, Steve, but I was going to Again, Jody hasn't had a chance to confirm that it was in her sent box on Friday
There-
afternoon.
At
But I'm
least in
wondering
my
if we take,
inbox, there is no Friday morning.
all right. We could either take 5 minutes to review give you guys times to review the resume. Otherwise, I can't see other course of action other than have to wait 2 or 3 weeks.
And as this is an interim position, what are the terms of discontinuance?
He'll be the interim director, so he'll actually be an employee of the city. And it's expected he would be with us for up until the point where we are able to recruit and hire a new IT director. I anticipate that being less than 6 months, hopefully I can't say for sure, but hopefully no more than 4 or 5, but I can't predict that at the moment.
All
That's
right, let me ask my question a different way. If by chance we were to take staff's recommendation on an interim IT director tonight, and upon review, something came up, in the unlikely chance, hypothetical, that something came up, what would be the recourse to let this candidate go and go get another one?
He's, as all directors are, and some other officers, they're serve at the pleasure of the mayor, they're an at-will employee, and we would go from there. There are no
The short-
contractual rates.
Yeah, the short answer is there isn't a very good recourse for the council. That's why I'm suggesting we just take 5 minutes to perhaps
Okay.
review that.
I'm
now.
willing to accept recommendation of staff, I just wanted to know that.
So he's not a
Councilmember Wong?
consultant, he's going to be a temporary staff.
That's correct. He'd be
Correct.
the interim director as an employee, yes.
I'm sorry, we just got to figure out what happened. I know I saw the email sent out from Jody on Friday that said, Councilmember, here's the resumes. If you have any questions, please contact. So I'm not sure.
None of us
It didn't
received
include a resume.
I'm not questioning that you didn't, oh, it did,
No, it's there, it just didn't include, it didn't include the resume.
the resume was not attached.
Yeah.
Right, well, we'll confirm what happened anyways. But meanwhile, I don't think the council wishes to prolong this for a couple, 2 to 3 weeks either. So let's just take 5 minutes if you can find that. If you can't find it, we'll get one in front of you. Bob, can you find yours or?
Yeah,
Top of
actually,
the
Jody
inbox.
told me she'd send it to me. She did, and I looked at it. And I felt comfortable with it, so
All right.
I would encourage that look-see.
Okay.
Came out at about 6:45, 6:50 this evening.
Well, you're on mountain time, it came out at 5:50.
Brian, do you have your copy?
Yep.
Okay.
Did I misspeak?
I didn't get
Time zone
anything at
wise,
it's
5:50
6:45.
from Ms. Warren.
It was received at 6:50 PM, 10 minutes before the start of the meeting.
Oh, there it is, got it, 6:50. 9 minutes ago, okay.
Swore.
Is that the Friday one?
Mine took it.
Is that the one you sent on Friday?
Mayor Matt, can we ask Steve to come up? And there's one question that I'm sort of burning to ask.
Yeah.
And
Or Councilmember Gies, I want to maybe give a couple more minutes
Okay.
if folks have kind of finished reviewing is everybody okay with starting now? Okay. All right. Steve, if you could come up, please. Thanks for waiting.
You're more than welcome.
No awkwardness?
No, not at all. I'm here to answer any questions you may have, so fire away.
Steve, I've seen from your resume the short stint in Sammamish.
Right.
Would you comment on it?
Certainly. I retired from North Shore Utility after 31 years in September of last year. And about January, I got an email from a colleague in the Emergency Managers Network for cities and utilities and said Sammamish was asking for some help to deal with their cyber attack. So I said, sure, I'll come. I showed up, I think on a Thursday, and noticed there was some work that needed to be done, let's just say, at the city. They had quite a big problem there. After trying to organize some staff and kind of get a direction going, about 3 or 4 days later, I was in the city manager's office, and they were recruiting me to be their interim IT director. So after that process, it took about 3 months to get the city back on their feet, to get services restored, and to get the malware removed from their system. So I was there for about 5 months. They started the process of hiring my replacement as a permanent IT director about 3 months in. They selected one, hired him, and he couldn't start for about 6 weeks, so I stayed on long enough for them to onboard this new guy and to give him a couple weeks of training. So that's the short version of remediating the cyber attack that they had at the city.
Thank you.
Certainly.
Any other questions, Council? Councilor Mayhew?
I just a question for you, Mayor, or for City Administrator, which is, have you already completed your process of background checks, or is that an ongoing process? Whatever employment verification, whatever your background process is.
We've completed most of it. I was attempting to get a hold of the interim city manager for the city of Sammamish, who was there for about a year. I spoke to him in a voicemail. He got back to me about 2 weeks ago. Said he would recommend him unconditionally.
Thank you. And then as far as compensation level, is it at or below what we were paying our previous IT director on a weekly, monthly basis?
It's about the same.
About the same?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions, Council? All right. Is there any, thank you, Steve. Is there any member of the public that like to comment on this appointment prior to action? See no one move forward. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's carried. Council, thank you for your accommodation there. Apologize we didn't get that to you. All right, with that, we'll move on to citizens' comments. At this time, we'll provide time for citizens to comment on items not on the agenda. First, a few ground rules. First, Snoqualmie citizens who are not present have a right to have their elected representatives perform their duties on behalf of the city in an efficient and orderly manner. Therefore, comments need to be limited to 3 minutes each. Second, please wait to be recognized. Come to the podium and state your name and address for the record. Third, direct your comments to the council as a whole and not to individual members in order to protect the privacy rights of employees and to protect members of the public from legal liability. Please note that this is not the appropriate venue to make complaints or accusations about an implied or named city employee or agent. Such oral comments will not be allowed but can be submitted in writing to the city clerk. Fourth, please note that this is not a time to ask questions of the council or mayor or staff or to engage in debate. The council will quietly and respectfully listen to your concerns. Fifth, please respect the decorum of these proceedings as all due respect will be afforded to you. And lastly, this is election time, and in compliance with election laws, please refrain from any political campaigning as you cannot use public resources such as video in this room and so forth for campaigning. So with that, is there anybody who would like to speak at this time? Anna.
Anna Sotelo, 7117 Allman Avenue Southeast. Last week, Chair Dillon, at a planning commission meeting, Chair Dillon asked Mark Hoffman regarding the vinyl banner signs downtown, and he made and I guess Councilmember Losay was there present, but he made a statement that it's something that administration is not interested in pursuing. And that concerned me when I went home and I looked up the ordinance for our signs, because that would mean 17.75.050, sign permit review never would have happened with those vinyl signs, and 17.75.030, sign permit application would have never happened. And the fact that he made a statement that it's something that administration is not interested in pursuing, following up with, was really concerning to me, and quite honestly, insult to injury for all of the Ridge pop-up businesses over the last 12 years that really invested a lot of money, $10,000 probably at a minimum, to follow our sign permit review process. So that statement was very concerning to me, and I know Councilmember Lissay was there. I just wanted everyone else to be aware of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna.
I brought it up.
Yeah, if you could stay at the podium, if you can speak. All right, thank you. Richard, you put your name on the public sign-up, but then you have a parentheses, comments to several agenda items, which I think you understand is not for...
I didn't know for sure what that sign-up was for.
Oh, okay.
I didn't realize it was for this.
All right, so you'll certainly have an opportunity at those items, so, okay. Would anybody else like to speak at this time to items not on the agenda? Yes, sir. Kim, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for remembering. Kim Loop, 7618 435th Avenue Southeast, Snoqualmie, Washington. That's unincorporated, King County. I'm here just out of concern of trust for leadership in the valley in reference to how the announcement of a particular person's retirement was reported in the paper. Given what I've heard through the city rumor mill, which is like wildfire, and I've checked several sources, it seems like the article and what I've heard on the street are quite different stories. My concern is the city's trust in you as leaders to present a safe story versus the one that actually seems to have been revealed to me, and what it does for my ability and others' ability to trust you as we go forward. I'd rather see you build trust with a whole bunch of people than potentially just protect the identity of one person, while the cost to several people is much more. So, not advice, not a suggestion, just something to think about. It's important. Okay?
Thank you, Kim. Is there anybody else who'd like to speak at this time? All right. Seeing no one move forward, we'll move on to the consent agenda. All items listed below will be enacted by one motion. Action items include minutes for the July 8th, 2019 regular city council meeting. Other approvals include Agenda Bill 19084, American Medical Response Ambulance Service Agreement Addendum, and Agenda Bill 19083, Forest Land Response Agreement and Federal Grant Agreement, Agreement Number 15-122 between the State of Washington Department of Natural Resources and the City of Snoqualmie. Do I have a motion, council?
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda as stated. Is there any member of the public that would like to comment on any of these items prior to action? Seeing no one move forward, any discussion, council? Hearing no discussion, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Motion is carried. Okay, just help me remember to pick up 7.3 in community development, and if the chair of that committee can help me remember, pick it up there, and then the other one was 8.5, right? Addendum on the consultant services?
And the warrants.
And the warrants, right. Where's the consultant services agreement belong? Oh, that's F&A, I guess. Okay, along with the warrants. Very good. All right. Moving on to ordinance. Finance Administration Committee, Agenda Bill 19066, ordinance amending Chapter 2.50 of the Snoqualmie Municipal Code related to public records disclosure, providing for severability and an effective date. This was introduced on the 8th, has had a public hearing, and is ready for action tonight.
Okay.
And if you could just read the motion. Yes, thank you.
Yep. Move to adopt ordinance number
1216.
1216, amending Chapter 2.50 Snoqualmie Municipal Code and related to public records disclosure, providing for severability and an effective date. May I have a second, please?
Second?
I have a motion and a second to approve Agenda Bill 19066 as stated by Councilmember Holloway. Is there any member of the public that would like to comment on this item prior to action? Okay, see no one move forward. Council, any discussion? Councilmember Shepherd.
So is this a point where we can read into the record the email that we got from the Coalition of Open government.
I suppose if you feel compelled to read the entire email, are you talking about the entire letter?
Yeah.
I'm not sure I can object. Go ahead, or anyone else can proceed.
So this is an email that was sent to City Council and the mayor and other staff members from Toby Nixon, who's the president of the Washington Coalition for Open Government. And it says, "Honorable council members, it has come to the attention of the Washington Coalition for Open Government that the Snoqualmie City Council has on your agenda for tonight's meeting the adoption of Public Records Act rules. While we heartily encourage every agency to adopt such rules as required by the PRA, the Washington Coalition of Government has significant concerns about the draft rules before you. The most significant of these concerns are the following. Section 6X, prevention of excessive interference with essential government functions. This section limits the number of hours to be spent by the public records officer on processing requests to just 16 hours per month. However, your public records officer has stated, as quoted in the Valley Record on June 15th, that the current average time used for processing requests is approximately 172 hours per month. We remind you that the PRA requires the city to provide the fullest assistance to inquirers and the most timely possible action on requests for information. We also remind you that handling of public records requests is itself an essential function of every agency. Artificially limiting employee work time for handling requests to less than 10% of the historical average time is inconsistent with these requirements and would likely subject the city to lawsuits under RCW 42.56.5502 for providing unreasonable estimates of the time required to respond to public records requests. We strongly recommend increasing the 16-hour limit to at least 172 hours per month so that the city will not be accused of knowingly and intentionally starving its essential public records function of demonstrably and admittedly necessary resources. The right answer to your problem is to increase staffing, not to unreasonably delay responding to PRA requests. We strongly recommend that the city establish a mechanism to monitor the demand for records and the performance of the public records staff so that the resources allocated can be periodically adjusted to meet the typical level of demand and to maintain the level of service expected for your citizens. We also strongly recommend that the city properly organize your records, including indexing to the maximum extent feasible to enable faster responses to requests. Section 6O, inspection of records. The last sentence of this section is possession of cameras, mobile phones, laptops, tablets, or other electronic devices within such room where public records are made available for inspection is prohibited. There's no provision of the PRA that enables agencies to prohibit requesters who are inspecting records from using their own cameras, scanners, or copiers to make copies of inspected records themselves. There is no legal reason for such a prohibition. Agencies are entitled to revenue for copying of records only if the agency makes the copies on behalf of the requester and cannot restrain requesters from making their own copies in order to force them to pay the agency for copies. We strongly recommend removing this provision. We also have concerns regarding provisions that require serializing requests from the same individual, Section 6G, which is the form of distinguishing amongst requesters by deprioritizing requests based on the identity of the requester, and that prohibit oral requests, but for the simplest matters, Section 5F, which could be viewed as discriminating against persons who are blind or have low vision or have limited English competence. We hope you will fully consider these concerns and recommendations and postpone adoption of these rules so that the necessary adjustments can be made. We would gladly work with your city attorney to update the draft to reflect these recommendations. Best regards, Toby Nixon.
I'm inclined to ask the city attorney to respond to some aspects of the letter, be responsible for that. So Bob, I'll just turn it to you.
Sure, thank you, Mayor, in no particular order. First of all, as to the hourly limit, well, let me back up. Point of procedure. The agenda bill that is currently in front of the council has to do only with amending the current code sections. All of the public records rules that are the subject of Mr. Nixon's emails are those that would be adopted pursuant to a resolution that will come up later this evening. So the email isn't really pertinent to the particular agenda bill, but if council would like, I can speak to the substance of it now or when that agenda bill comes up.
They're highly related, so I think, go ahead.
Okay.
That's why I didn't cut Councilmember Shepherd off. I figured it was either now or later it'll all be discussed, so.
With respect to the hour limitations, as the resolution preamble to the, and the recitals to the resolution recite, the Public Records Act has a number of different purposes that the council has to balance in adopting rules. One of those is to prevent excessive interference by public records requests with essential governmental functions. And so part of the way that is implemented is for the council to provide policy direction to staff on how much time city staff are to spend responding to records requests versus performing their other duties. The state legislature and voters have adopted other statutory provisions that prohibit the legislature from imposing an unfunded mandate on the city. And that is why the Public Records Act does not direct or mandate that the city spend any base amount or base dollar amount or hours in responding requests. It falls to the city and staff to determine how much time is available and then to respond, to make reasonable estimates, and then to respond to requests accordingly. So Mr. Nixon himself is a city council member for the city of Kirkland, and the city of Kirkland was one of the leaders, one of the first cities to adopt hourly limits for their staff. Each city obviously has to make those choices based on the amount of resources that are available. And this recommendation in front of you, as far as the 16 hours for the public records officer and the hours for the others to assist, is based on the amount of time that's available. The assertion that we have to take the high point, which is the 172 hours that Mr. Nixon refers to, the city clerk mentioning, has no basis in the law or fact. The council needs only to choose something that's reasonable. And as we go forward and respond to individual requests, of course, we need to provide a reasonable estimate of time that it's going to take to respond based on balancing no excessive interference and also with providing records. And if a requester disagrees with that estimate, there's a procedure under the Act for them to bring that to the attention of a court and ask for intervention if they think that we're wrong. So this can be addressed on a case-by-case basis. What we're looking for with the rules is policy direction from the council on what's a good level to start at in light of the very recent significant spike in the number of requests and the amount of time that it's taken. With respect to the comment about no cameras, et cetera, in the viewing area, another purpose of the Public Records Act that the rules need to accomplish is protection of the records. And this no cameras, no other devices in the room is something that federal agencies do. If you go to the EPA, for example, in Seattle and ask to see records, they will allow you in the room with only a pencil and a pad and no purses, laptops, anything. This goes with that, and the reason for it is to protect public records from being electronically copied and then manipulated such that the records are being altered. There was a piece just today, I think, on NPR that, it used to be that what we had to worry about was Photoshop, and now people are talking about deep fakes where on an automated basis people can take digital content, whether it be a document or a video, and have a computer alter it to make it look like something completely different. So if the the city gets a request for a copy, we can provide that in a way that we can protect, at least to the extent we can, from manipulation. If people come in with all kinds of devices, we don't have any of that ability to protect the record from manipulation. So that's the reason for that. I think that covers the basics on, if there's any other questions, I'll.
Well, can you,
Councilmember Hallway.
can you speak to limiting access to non-speaking requesters and/or potentially the blind or disabled?
Oh, certainly, and I'm sorry for
Which I find amazing.
omitting that. The reason for not taking oral requests as a general rule is to avoid the confusion that could later arise if someone says, no, I actually asked for this or records related to that, and there's no record of it. Certainly, if there's someone who has a disability and requests an accommodation from that, of course, the city complies with the Americans with Disability Act, and we can always provide that accommodation if we get that kind of request from someone who says, I'm not able to provide you the request in writing. And if the council, I think it goes without saying, but we could certainly write an indication into the rules that the ADA applies and the city will provide reasonable accommodations where requested. We already do that, and we can certainly add it here if people would like to see that reflected in the rules.
Councilmember Ross?
So I think one thing to point out, I believe we have 10 departments in the city. Is that correct?
8.
8,
departments.
okay. So, and each one of them would be looking at 8 hours per month, is that correct?
That's correct.
So that's 64 hours, plus 16 hours for our city clerk, so it's going to be about 80 hours then that we'd be looking at, right? It's not just
Right.
16 hours.
And I don't think that Toby understood that exactly.
Yeah.
So.
Right, so we just need to state that we're willing to do at least 80 hours a month of city time on public records request.
Councilmember Shepherd?
So as far as taking a camera and manipulating the image, you could, if you got a copy of the document, you could do the same thing. So that argument doesn't hold water for me.
It depends what format, and the rules allow the clerk the ability to dictate what format and what protections to apply to digital records. So it gives the city more control than if someone walks in using a device with software on it that's created for the express purpose of allowing that kind of AI-assisted manipulation. It's not, obviously, it won't be perfect, and it's always difficult to stay ahead of people who do things like that, but starting out with having the city have control of what the digital images are is the best way that we could come up with.
I'm still not following what you're saying. Okay, so if we have a paper document, or we have a stack of paper documents that somebody's done a public request for, you're saying we can't use a camera or a phone to take pictures of those documents if this goes into effect?
That's correct. If the requester wants to request copies, just as now, and under the rules, they would have the ability to do that, if it's a paper or digital.
And do we have other cities that are doing the same thing?
I don't know. I know of at least the federal agencies are.
But no other cities that we know
And the
of?
federal agencies are subject to the Freedom of Information Act, which Washington courts construe in parallel with the Public Records Act.
I really have no desire to be the first to do this. I think that would be foolish.
Councilmember Hallway?
But point of clarification, if they do a Freedom of Information Act and either a digital or paper copy is provided, it is theirs to do with as they see fit. We have the public record to fall back if there's any issues. If, however, we feel the information contains other information, other sensitivities such that we want to keep it, you can read it, but you can't take a copy with you, that's where the restriction on photocopying or photographic material comes into place. Case in point, the warrants we do review, those we don't print out copies because it has account information, personal identification information involved in there. And you're more than free, as a council member, you often do, take a look at those, but we're not going to do digital copies, and we're not going to let you take pictures of items that may have personal information of employees or other companies that we deal with in there. So that would be reason for that higher level of restriction to say, you may look, but you may not take a picture.
And again, I should have said this at the outset, for these particular aspects, the rules are lengthy, and Mr. Nixon's email calls out only a handful of things about them. I think some of the other comments call out a handful, 2, 3 things. So on any of those topics, of course, council has the legislative prerogative to, adjust, tweak, remove those items if it, so chooses. So staff are certainly open to direction from the council on any of that language if the council sees fit.
Any further discussion, Council? Councilmember Jeans.
So I don't remember during the budget process where we got very deep into so many different things. I forget how we addressed the administrative people regarding the extraordinary burden on them to be complying with public records requests. But I think we did discuss it during the budget process, and I don't know how it came out. And I would suggest that we keep particularly good records between now and the next budget year discussions to give more attention to this thing in particular, to find out what as best we can, estimate the reasonable requests by the public in the reasonable time it would take to do so. And it might result in having to add to staff or having to do other things that initiate volunteers is a possibility. We're going to take a fresh look at it, but I'm not willing to do that now. I'm willing to go forward now, but I think we should take a look at this in the future.
Councilmember Lassay.
In respect to the ordinance specifically, is there a state law that requires cities to index and provide an indexing option?
The statute says that we either need to index or that we don't need to index if the city makes a determination that doing so would be unduly burdensome. And as you see reflected in the ordinance, the code has for a long time contained that determination. I think this set of changes in the ordinance shortens that a little bit, but it's maintaining something that's been in the code since 2004. And many cities do that. Of course, particularly cities like Snoqualmie that have paper records that go back tens of multiple decades and beyond, that indexing would be pretty difficult, while we're also trying to manage electronic records going forward. So I think that's the reason for it.
I guess if I can follow up on that. What would it take then to, simply saying it's a burdensome, it is burdensome for me to mow the lawn every week, but I kind of have to do it. What would it take? What would it ultimately take? Does it take this council saying we're going to do it? Does it take?
I'm going to defer that
staff?
question, if I may, to the city clerk, who has some idea of the actual size of our archives.
We currently have minutes, ordinances, resolutions, all indexed and available on our city website. For the last year or two, we've been putting all of our contracts and agreements on the website. Easements, property information is available on the King County website. We have in the biennial budget for 1920 enterprise management software. It is our goal to get that software going. It's not going to happen overnight. It will take time, but that will put everything that we can on the website and available to the public.
Jody, do you have a sense of how large our paper archives are? How many thousand, how many boxes or
We actually had
pages?
received a request for public record from a gentleman, I believe it was 2 years ago, wanting every single document that was ever created by the city, including emails. And there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of documents. I don't have that figure with me, but it would take more than my lifetime to get that all indexed. One of the largest requests that we get are for emails. And those are, you know, how do you index the emails? So we are looking into that. I have a meeting set up with the Attorney General's office to get some guidance and some suggestions on the best practice in order to make that go a lot smoother and a lot easier for staff. So we are working on making it work better. Does that help? By the way, the gentleman withdrew his request.
Councilmember Ross.
There's quite a few things that are indexed then. You said ordinances, contracts, meeting minutes. So all this is.
Agendas, yeah.
And agendas, all this is uploaded to the website. So what is it then that's not indexed?
Probably the most common one, as Jody said, is emails, and they're hard to index, and often the staff has to go through every email to redact any sensitive information. So it's not like you can just do a search, grab a bunch of emails and send them out. Staff has to go through them individually, which can
Maybe-
be very time consuming.
Maybe working correspondence would not be indexed, only the final, the final document.
And I don't know especially for older records, what indexes exist for boxes. Typically, things go to archives by box, and there's an index that gives a notion of what's in the box, but not a document by document or record by record index. I've not seen that for any of the archives, and the archives go back, to the
1903.
115 years, yeah. Any further discussion, council? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
No.
Okay, motion passes 4-2. All right, Agenda Bill 19087, ordinance amending ordinances 1210 and 1213, adopting and amending the 2019 to 2020 biennial budget and providing for severability and effective date. This is going to be introduced and ready for action tonight.
All right. And this is 07, right? No, 087.
087, yes, sir.
The proposed amendment would delete funds number 303 Park Improvement Fund, 310 Transportation Capital Fund, and 324 Snoqualmie Parkway Fund, 326 Sidewalk Construction Fund, and 327 Complete Streets Award Fund from the list of funds subject to the limitation of expenditures be only for projects included in the approved non-utility capital improvement program. The purpose of the amendment would allow expenditure of already appropriated funds for the following activities. Fund 303, Parks Improvement Fund, Kanoya Park Improvement Project, Fund 310, Transportation Capital Fund, I-90 Interchange Funding, and Fisher Avenue Grant Pass-Through, Fund 324, Snoqualmie Parkway Fund, Signal Painting, Fund 326, Sidewalk Construction Fund and Sidewalk Repair Projects, and Fund 327, Complete Streets Award Fund, Downtown Pedestrian Safety Improvements. The substitute ordinance is provided which, in addition to amending the budget ordinance as described above, would waive the requirement for a second reading under Council Rules of Procedure 9.6.2.2 in order to avoid expiration of public bids or state and/or federal grant funding agreements. Move to adopt ordinance number
1217.
1217, amending ordinance 1210 and 1213 adopting and amending the 2019-2020 biennial budget and providing for severability and effective date. B, substitute ordinance amending ordinances 210, 212, or 213, or 1213, adopting and amending the 2019-2020 biennial budget and providing for severability and effective date. The substitute ordinance provides for waiver of the requirement of a second reading under Rules of Procedure 9.6.2.2. Mayor Larson's recommendation.
Second.
All right, motion and a second to approve Agenda Bill 19087 is patiently read by Councilmember Holloway. Is there any member of the public that would like to comment on this item prior?
Point of order?
Yes, sir.
This is an amendment to the budget. What is the requirement to pass this? Does this require supermajority?
We don't, the supermajority requirement per statute applies to budget amendments that increase appropriations. And since this isn't touching the appropriations, but addressing just proviso language, we don't believe it requires a supermajority.
Okay. So is there any member of the public that would like to comment on this item prior to action? Richard and then Anna?
Richard Shield, 6701 West Crestview Loop, Southeast. I'd just like to make a kind of a general comment about, I definitely think we don't have any choice but to get these going, because we don't want these projects to be held up and have problems that way. But I do think it's an indication of sometimes we get ahead of ourselves. We didn't have the capital improvement plan in place. We passed a budget. It seems to me there should have been, things much further along before approving on a budget for something where we didn't have the plan in place. Thanks.
Thank you, Richard. Anna?
Anna Sotelo, 7117 Almond Avenue Southeast. I guess after sitting through the committee meetings last week, I'm confused because I don't feel like all of those items were explained. And then I guess I'm confused because I sat through the entire budgeting and there was only one park on the list all year, and that was that park, the Keone, excuse me for butchering the name, Larry. Keonian? Thank you. That's the only park that's been on the CIP list, so I don't understand how it got no money for it. But then I guess I'm more confused, and excuse me if it's just my ignorance or just, I don't know. How, if you guys haven't even seen a CIP list, do you know what can and can't be cut or what should and shouldn't? I don't understand that. And I guess I see sidewalk being, all these things being cut that are really, really, really crucial. But I guess my biggest concern and question is, how are you going to do this without seeing a CIP list yet?
Is there anybody else who'd like to comment at this time? All right, council, further discussion? Councilor Mayhew and then Councilor Holloway.
Just point of order. Just follow up to my previous question. In this agenda bill, there's listing of funding for the I-90 interchange, which to my knowledge was absolutely not part of the capital budget at the time it was passed. That wasn't anticipated, that spending. So it's hard for me to understand how this would not constitute an increase in funding. Isn't this going to be spending that is above and beyond what was anticipated at the time of the budget, and therefore that we're going to have to figure out how to fund that?
While Mr. Hammoud's coming up, but my understanding is that what this is addressing is allowing expenditures out of this particular fund in advance of the CIP, and then if that's the limitation of the fund, that's the limitation of the fund.
Yes, but I'm making a point of order question about whether or not this requires a supermajority, and I'm questioning if this includes an increase in funding, an increase in expenditure,
Or increase in appropriation.
an increase in appropriation, then wouldn't that require a supermajority? And since it includes the I-90 interchange funding, which was not anticipated at the time that the appropriation was passed, wouldn't this in fact be an increase in appropriation, and unless we're cutting a whole bunch of other funding or projects, which I haven't heard, so, and therefore subject to supermajority?
Councilmember Hall, if you could, I'll have Robert speak to that in terms of whether there was capacity within those already existing appropriated funds.
Yes, so Councilmember Mayhew, we did do internal analysis on that very question. And here's what the council came out of the budget process with was that they appropriated certain funds, but then they restricted the funds afterward when the budget ordinance was actually passed. But there were appropriated funds in there with that restriction that was subject to the CIP being reauthorized. Now, there was funding in 2019 for particular projects. There was in Fund 310, the Transportation Capital Fund, there was an appropriation, a 2-year appropriation over $600,000. In that fund, there were no projects attached to that fund, but that constitutes an appropriation within itself. So there did not have to be, and Bob, stop me if I'm wrong, City Attorney Sturbank, stop me if I'm wrong, but there did not have to be projects attached to that appropriation. It was just the
Order, my
standard
question-
appropriations itself.
My question is not being answered. Was this I-90 interchange funding part of that appropriation, and therefore there will be no request coming to this council for alternate ways to fund this? This actually was what was intended for that $500,000.
So the budget was appropriated at the fund level, as Mr. Hammoud was just describing, so there were not individual projects attached to the fund appropriations for any of those funds. That was the reason, my understanding is that council imposed that outside of the appropriations limitation because you wanted to see a CIP so you could order the projects and see what the dollar amounts were. So, but if the appropriation is a $500,000 for projects that meet the description of this fund, which the I-90, then it would be an appropriate expenditure. If there was some other project that also met it, but then the fund was exhausted, then we wouldn't be able to spend it on that project.
But that's not my question. My question is whether this I-90 interchange funding, which is specifically listed here, if that was not in the original appropriation, then this is an increase in appropriation.
There were no individual projects in that appropriation. So the I-90 project was not listed, but neither was any other project. There was a dollar
Right,
amount.
so there'll be no forthcoming request for funding for the interchange project. We're going to fund it out of this funding that's already present in this fund.
I think Councilmember Holloway's been chomping at the bit to maybe add to this particular conversation. Let's let him do that. Councilmember May, I'm happy to come back to you.
You can scold me later if I wasted time. At the end of our budget discussions, we appropriated these funds, but we restricted them until such time as we saw the capital improvement plans for each of the funds. Okay? What this action does is take these specific projects and removes them from that restriction and moves them forward. Okay? Now, was any of these projects in any of those funds at the close of our budget discussion? My answer would be no, because we did not have an approved CIP list to go with them. Condition still holds. This merely says, we're taking action on these specific projects to approve them against these funds in lieu of waiting for the complete CIP plan. Okay?
And you won't see these projects in the CIP plan because most of these, with the exception of the I-90 interim on-ramp, were already in motion and process before the 1920 budget or biennium budget was approved or debated. Councilmember Mayhew, I said come back to you. Go ahead.
So that's not at all what this proposal does. That's a completely inaccurate description of this. What this does,
I would ask for opinion from the city attorney on that.
what this does,
You and I have differing opinions here.
no, it's a question of fact. And do I have the floor?
Councilmember May, if you could direct your comments to the chair, please.
What this does is it removes.
Councilmember Mayhew. I'm just trying to get back on protocol so we're not having debates amongst councilors.
I'm just looking in this direction. I
Okay.
have fellow council members. Am I not allowed to look in that direction?
Go ahead, Jim.
Proceed, Councilmember Mayhew.
What this does, to be clear, is it removes all budget controls from 100% of the capital funding for 2020 and over 70% of all capital spending approved for 2019. So in total, it removes budget controls over 80% of all capital funding, over 2.7 million of capital funding is removed from budget controls by this. It doesn't fund specific projects. It releases from control 2.7 million of capital funding. That's what this does. I am completely in favor of these projects, to be clear. I don't have any problem with these. I support these projects. I just don't think that in order to do these projects, we should remove all budget controls. I think what we should do is very simple. It's what we said at the time we passed the budget. We said you can spend money on projects that are added to the CIP list or that are on the council-approved CIP list, which, by the way, Koinonia Park is on the council-approved CIP list. But in any event, all we need to do is add these projects, which I support all of them, to the CIP list. What we don't need to do is remove all the budget controls. So let's just do the simple thing. We can do it tonight. Let's just approve these projects as additions to the CIP list in the dollar amounts that are listed here and leave the budget controls in place.
I'm not an attorney and I'm not an accountant, and I frankly, I'm not hung up on whatever way you want to do it. I just want to keep the projects moving forward. So
I do too.
if the city attorney and the city finance director is amenable to however you want to structure that, just respond to what the suggestion is, and I want to make sure the other council members understand what you're doing too. Councilmember Holloway, you clearly look a little quizzical, so I'll toss it to you.
I agree with everything up until the conclusion that my honorable peer mentioned. Point of fact, we did restrict these funds until we had a review of the CIP projects. That review has not occurred.
It will shortly. but-
It probably will, hopefully will shortly, but having stated that, there is not an approved CIP list. Okay, so I can't stand on that pillar in this discussion. Okay? So, again, what this would do, and I tried my best to channel you while you were in Europe, and we had very similar discussion in committee along these lines.
We were all trying to channel Jim while he was in Europe.
Yeah, you probably felt it.
That's what that was.
I wasn't. Point of fact is, this is to get these particular projects unrestricted from that restriction and move forward. The conclusion I fault on is the discussion we thought you would want us to go on, is that some of these may not warrant this action and may be more appropriately held until we have that CIP review. And I guess I would lean on fellow council member Lissay. I believe he has a motion to amend that he would like to propose.
His is maybe rather minor compared to what Jim May you might want to propose, but Councilmember, let's go ahead.
On that subject, I'll just go ahead and move to my proposed motion is to, I'll read the motion, but it's essentially to remove a few of these funds from this list. I think they're
Or the funds or the projects?
both, anything to do with those funds. So the point is that the idea here is that we need to address the things we need to address. But we do not want to relieve the administration or the council from the obligation that we put forward in creating the budget. We did it for good reasons. We did it for the right reasons. We need to follow through on that. With that being said, I move to strike funds 324, 326, and 327 from the list of funds in the motion.
Second?
Moved and seconded as stated by Councilmember Lissay. Any discussion, Council? Councilmember Lissay, I don't recall you mentioning projects along with funds you just removed.
Can you mention the projects associated with
Oh, I'm
those
sorry,
funds?
okay.
The fund, so to give some little just definition, the funds that we're keeping is Fund 303 Parks Improvement Fund Koinonia Park Improvement Project. And we're keeping Fund 310 Transportation Capital Fund, the I-90 Interchange Funding, and the Fisher Avenue Grant Pass-Through. The ones that are being removed are the Fund 324 Snoqualmie Parkway Fund, signal painting, Fund 326 Sideway Construction Fund and Sidewalk Repair Projects, and Fund 327 Complete Streets Award Fund Downtown Pedestrian Safety Improvements.
Mr. Mayor, if I can, just clarification on the motion, because the draft ordinance amendment shows certain funds being stricken. So when when the motion says are we striking the striking, and therefore the limitation on those remains, or vice versa?
The limitation will remain
On,
funds 324, 326, and 327.
okay, thank you.
He was saying strike it from the agenda bill.
Remove them from the bill.
We would remove the, yes,
That's what I meant.
thank you, thank
Councilor
you.
Ross, I think you've been patiently waiting.
Right.
And again, we're now speaking to the motion. Councilor Lisay.
Kind of overall question, though. We're deleting the funds from the ordinance so that we can fund projects for 2019. But what happens to projects for 2020? So these funds continue to remain out of the ordinance, and then we fund 2020 projects.
That's going to be part of the non-utility CIP discussion. 2020 through 2025 has not been funded at this point and not appropriated by council at this point. So that you will be able to, when we present the non-utility CIP in the next month, hopefully, we will be presenting that for passage by the city council, which would be the 2020 through
Right.
2025 CIP.
But it keeps these funds out of that ordinance then, that was out of the, we're deleting it out of the ordinance, right? These
I don't
funds.
know. I'm getting a little confused with the motions and everything. I'm sorry.
Well, so we're taking Fund 303, we're removing it from the ordinance.
Yes.
That was supposed to be only applied to non-utility CIPs for 2019 and 2020. And we're doing that because we don't have our non-utility CIP for 2019. So this also impacts,
Right, so right now,
Funny.
and we did get some interpretation on what happens with existing projects, and the way we brought this agenda bill, just some background, and to Councilmember Mayhew and I expressed concern about this. We were under the impression, and Bob Sturbank and I and the mayor and Bob Larson talked about this, that existing projects, and that includes grant funds we've already received, were restricted by the restriction is currently in place in the budget ordinance, meaning and then just wanted to make a side note, in Fund 326 and Fund 327, we actually received grants that, in 327, for example, that grant, we have to spend that money by March of 2020, or we forfeit the money we've already received in the amount up to $250,000 from the state. So those current CIP projects, we were under the interpretation we can't even spend money on the current CIP because of the restriction placed on that. So all we're trying to do is exempt those specific projects, or whatever the council decides to exempt, to fund these projects in 2019. And again, that's up to the council what you want to do.
Councilmember Mayhew. And I don't know if you had a more elegant solution that you were suggesting than some of these fun things there.
I think so, but hopefully so.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
The concern I have with, so I guess we're talking about Little Dinosaur right now,
Yes.
we went through a training, and we use dinosaurs to help us understand the motions we're making. But the Fund 30, well, let me say something rather than get into the details. We do have a CIP. We have a council-approved CIP. It's years old, but it runs through 2020. It's the thing I was flipping through here. You saw me flipping through something, and I made a statement that Koinonia Park is on that CIP. It's available on our city website, and there is an approved. So those projects that are on here, I'm holding in my hand the approved CIP. Those projects that are on here are not limited by the current budget ordinance. So the amounts that we appropriated in these capital funds, we said can only be spent on projects if they're on a council-approved CIP list. Well, there is one, and it actually includes Koinonia Park. It does not include some of these other items that are being referenced here. So the thing that I think is the easiest is if we just take that the specific projects are listed right in either in the agenda bill or in the staff report that accompanies. I believe there's less than half a dozen of them, and there's dollar amounts associated with them, so we can read them right from either the staff report or the agenda bill. And I would be inclined, if the rest of the council thinks is a useful way through this, is that we simply, we probably need some help from the city attorney. My own thought was, rather than this particular agenda bill, or perhaps just replace the wording entirely with something that merely says, the motion would be to add that series of projects, the half a dozen or so projects with the dollar amounts listed, that we just add those to the CIP list. By doing that, we then allow those amounts and those projects to go forward without any further action. The budget in place already does that.
Tied to what fund?
Well, we wouldn't need to tie them to any particular fund. We would just approve them as being on the CIP list, and then which fund you take it from is an administrative decision.
Point of order.
All right,
But
Councilmember Hawley, point of order.
there is not a 2019 approved CIP list. What you're looking at is 2017. I ensure that there were prior CIP lists as approved. Again, these funds were restricted pending review and approval of a current CIP. We do not have a current CIP.
I don't know if the language said current or an
Well,
approved CIP list.
you
yet.
could
I mean, I don't think that list expired. I mean, Brian, we didn't suddenly stop having an ability to do any CIP projects. I mean, I would,
Perhaps, Andrew, could you pull up the substitute ordinance there and,
Yeah, eventually we're going to have to go back and what we actually.
thank you. And scroll to the bottom of,
yeah, I don't think the council intended to frustrate itself to suddenly have everything stop.
there.
You know, you didn't, all the
So-
projects that were in motion, the 2017-18 CIP.
Right, but some portion of the projects on the 2017, 2018 were not in motion. These in particular.
Okay, go ahead, Bob.
Go ahead, Bob, sorry.
I'm sorry, so the operative language is at the bottom, what this ordinance would be amending from the prior budget ordinances. And so the limitation on expenditures, no, it's right there at the bottom. No, Bob, that's fine, it's right at
Raise
the
it,
bottom
so
of
you
the
see
page.
it.
The expenditures can be made only for capital projects that are included in a non-utility capital improvement program approved by the city council. And so, I guess it's for the council, this is the council's ordinance to determine, did that mean this, the 2014 through 2020, or 15 through 20 CIP, or did you intend only a brand-new one that is yet to come before the council?
Councilor May.
If I could just share with the council, at the time we were going through the council, you may recall, we were getting up to the deadline in December. We'd gone through quite a few meetings. And at the time, you may remember, I proposed this particular wording as a way of getting us past dealing with capital funds so that we could approve the budget, but still retain control over how those got spent. And at the time, I did discuss with the city attorney this very specific CIP plan, and we looked at the fact that it included spending for 19, and so those projects, so our thought at the time was, our hope was, as you all remember, that we would get to this in the first quarter, and then Snowmageddon came and some things have gotten pushed out, so I think it's coming soon. But the point was that, the belief was that because we had this CIP list that included 2019 projects, that would get us through the early part of 2019 without stopping anything that was going. And so we're just gotten a little bit later in 19, which is why I think we're bumping up against, there's some projects that need to start now that aren't on the list. But I think we can solve that by approving those particular projects to be added to the list that's already there, which is what they're operating under right now. So I guess I'm repeating myself on that, but that's why this section 4 wording says council approved, because we knew we had one, and it was just, it was meant to refer to this at the time.
And to that point, I would urge, I understand the committee's kind of on a stand on principle, as the chair was saying, that they still want to make the signal to the administration that they want to preserve the council's restrictions and controls. And by the way, we've had a lack of those restrictions and controls in years past, but I can't recall a single time. I mean, Bob and Brian were here, where we ever proceeded with a project, although perhaps we legally could have, without coming back to council for approval. I mean, that just would have been unheard of. So it's not like some nefarious things were being done in the past. So to that point, I understand the principal stand on things like the painting of the stoplight poles and sidewalk grinds, which we've done every year, and I just don't think it looks good for us to suddenly have that halted over these issues. And so I appreciate what Councilmember, let's say, responding to the committee's concerns expressed, but if we do it in the way you're approaching it, Councilmember Mayhew, I think there's a way to perhaps get those projects back on the list as well. Councilor Lissay?
I'm perfectly happy with doing this with apples or with oranges, which just pick one. Councilor Mayhew's method seems perfectly reasonable, and probably the simpler and easier way to do it is just to add these projects, and if these are the projects we want to include, to the active CIP list. And then how that happens, I mean, do we reject this agenda bill and a new one has to come forward? How does that happen?
Councilor Mayhew?
If I could suggest, perhaps we could take a short recess, during which time the city attorney and any interested council members could just huddle on that very specific point of what language would be appropriate to achieve that, and then we could come back and do that.
So long as that huddle didn't constitute a quorum, I'd be fine with that.
So three or
less.
Three or less of
F&A
us, yeah.
committee thing, so it should be F&A committee members.
Yeah. Okay.
That'd be
I'm
acceptable.
amenable
I'd
to
propose
that.
we do that.
Robert, you could partake in that conversation too. How much time do you figure would be appropriate?
5 minutes.
5 minutes, 10 minutes?
Take long.
I think 5 or 10 minutes, city attorney.
Let's pick up at 8:30. All right. So we're going to have a recess for until 8:30. All right. Council meeting is back in session. Does the, Councilmember Holloway?
All right, I get first couple motions to get us into a clean square to start moving forward. I would ask that.
Agree to rescind the.
Oh, yeah, thank you. That's what I was just going to
Yeah,
ask.
I was going to ask
Councilmember
Councilman
Lasay,
Lasay to withdraw his motion, and I would withdraw my second on the amendment of the original motion.
Councilmember
You
Lasay?
withdraw? All right.
All right. So
Second,
the
I
dinosaur motion's been withdrawn.
would like to actually also withdraw the motion on the agenda bill. I made the original motion. I think, Bob, you second. I would like to rescind my motion with your concurrence.
Agreed?
Okay? And we are now at clean slate. At this stage,
Okay, so you've taken the original agenda bill off the, all right,
yes, sir.
okay.
At this stage, I would like to release the floor to Councilmember Mayhew. I believe he has a motion to proceed us forward.
And you'll read this as a substitute for Agenda Bill 19087?
We are in the opinion that we can make a motion outside of an agenda bill, get approval to do it, and move forward outside of drafting a whole new agenda bill.
I'll defer to the city clerk to, or the city attorney to advise on the protocol. I just want to make sure it's captured as some number. I mean, do we do a substitute so it's still called Agenda Bill 087 or?
The council can vote to remove an item from its agenda during the meeting and can vote to add a new item in its place if the council so chooses. So,
All right, well, I guess the city clerk will figure out how to index it.
Do we need a motion, city attorney, to add an item to the agenda before I start reading it in?
Yeah, I think if what council wishes to do is strike the current agenda item and replace it with another, that a motion to that effect would be in order before proceeding with the substance of the new agenda item.
Move to introduce or reintroduce Agenda Bill AB 19087 with content as recommended by Councilmember Mayhew.
Second.
All right. Motion is second as stated by Councilmember Holloway.
Move to add 4 projects to the current 2017 through 2022 CIP list that is approved by the council, adding 4 projects to that list being the Parkway Pole Painting Project, the Downtown Sidewalks Project, the Complete Streets Project, and the I-90 Interchange Project.
Second.
Motion is second as stated by Councilmember Mayhew. Any discussion? Councilmember Mayhew, if you're appropriate, could have Jody add the non-utility CIP, just non-utility, add that to the motion, just to clarify. Okay,
Yes.
thank you. Councilmember Holloway.
I guess, point of question, though. I would like to motion to amend to remove the pole painting. I think we need to have discussion around that, as that is not presently time critical nor financially critical in terms of getting grants approved or meeting our commitment according to those grants. I still recommend that we remain on our commitment that we hold these until we go through a CIP review. Do I have a second?
Motion is second as stated by Councilmember Holloway. Councilmember Mayhew.
So I wonder if there's anyone from Parks and Public Works here who could comment on the time sensitivity, if there is one, around the pole painting project, when that would need to move forward and be completed by. I believe there's something to do with weather involved.
Yeah, not grants, but weather.
Yeah, Brian Kraus, Operations Manager, Parks and Public Works. We'd want to ideally do that when the temperatures, daytime highs, don't go below 50 degrees. Currently, the project it's an aesthetic concern at this point. It's not a structural deficiency by any way. So if we can tolerate looking at the condition, it'd be more that than anything right now.
When would the months, when would you lose your, so I assume that to meet that temperature requirement, it's summertime or maybe autumn. When would you need to complete that project, and therefore when would you need to start that project in order to reach that completion date?
We'd really need to act now to get quotations to complete the work by about October 1st.
So if we didn't approve that essentially now, you would have to put that off a year, probably because of the weather.
That's correct.
Do you have bid packages ready?
No, we don't. We would
How long will it
solicit,
take to do bid package?
not very long, probably a week or so to scope it and
Okay,
throw it
so
out to the roster.
You're a week out to even getting it out to bid. We could start review of the CIP next week in committee and have it closed out in council in 2 weeks.
There's
You
no.
gotta, there's
3
an extra
weeks.
week, yeah.
I don't have holidays.
You're saying the council will approve that CIP in 2 weeks?
I can't commit to, it
Commit to that, yeah.
depends on how it stands up.
I'm tempted to start laying bets.
I wonder if,
Brian, if I could just quickly ask, that's an ongoing maintenance item we pretty much do annually, kind of moving up the Parkway or town and then back down. I mean, we get as much of that done every year. I mean, we have to stay on top of that annually in order to,
That's correct. This one particularly got, just, there was issues with the paint on this particular one.
Councilmember Mayhew,
sorry, nothing.
Councilmember Ross.
If it's maintenance, why is this coming out of capital funds?
This was described as spiky during our budget discussions.
We haven't used that term in a while, all right.
All right, here we go, guys.
Jim caused it.
I would just comment that it's typical for a project like that to be coming out of capital funds. Many cities do that. And the reason it's spiky is because it is something, as described, that's not structural. So if you put it out, it's aesthetic. We all drive past on the Parkway up by the new school. You can see those, you probably notice it just about every time you pass by. So it's aesthetic, but it's not structural. So because of that, you can move it around between budget years, which is why most cities pay for that out of
I would just,
capital.
although I think everybody knows in this community, aesthetics is pretty important, so
Yeah, not to say that's unimportant, just.
fairly high standard that folks expect, so.
What-
Councilmember Shepherd.
So I think it's odd, this light pole is really having trouble as far as its paint, and it seems to be different than what the other light poles are doing. Can you explain why the paint's peeling more on this pole than the other poles?
We've actually done touch-up painting on several other intersections. This one didn't get treated or at the same time as the other ones did. So we did see failure of the paint at Center and Douglas as well. But not as bad as this intersection. We have checked with the manufacturer to see if there's some defect with the paint, because it seems to be coming off from the inside and like exfoliating off. So that is something, we're looking at too, proper preparation. But it is part of standard ongoing maintenance with respect to poles that are painted.
Councilmember Mayhew.
So I'm just curious, sense of the council, if we pull this poll item off now, as long as we'd be willing in 3 weeks to see maybe this one item coming back as a CIP addition, even though the remainder of the CIP was still under review, is that potentially what is being thought of? Because I wouldn't object to that, but if we're going to miss the timing, then if we're not going to do it pretty much in 3 weeks, we ought to just do it tonight or decide that we're putting it off a year is what I sort of sense on this. Well, I wouldn't be specifically asking you because I'm not allowed to.
No, but if the CIP is brought forth in such a manner as we can make determination and we, the council, through whatever reasons, decide to not make a determination, I would have, at that stage, it's back on us, and I would have no objection to moving individual projects.
Or at least.
But I at least want that first attempt at a CIP review before we forego the limitation we put in place.
It wasn't even planned that this was even part of that CIP conversation, because it was stuff that's been in motion every year. It was in the 2017 plan, 2018, 19. I'm frankly scratching my head as to what changed that we've been
So,
doing in the
but
last 15 years that
was
suddenly this is.
prior stated in this conversation, staff made the assumption all projects were in scope of the limitation. Okay, so if staff has made that interpretation, this is in scope of that limitation.
I'm interested in outcomes for the community, and I'm having a hard time understanding why procedures are trumping outcomes for the community. That's what I'm, frankly, just frustrated with, so. Councilmember Ross.
I would prefer to keep it in this, to add it as the CIP now, instead of seeing it in 3 weeks and having to add to this agenda bill that we're working on right now. I don't want to see it coming back.
Councilmember Lasay.
I'm in favor of removing it and keeping it removed until next year, because I think a CIP is more important than pole painting.
Have you seen the polls?
I see it every day. I brought it up in Parks and Public Works. I think what's important is a review of the CIP and passing what we should have done back in October and November.
With the idea that this might come off the CIP then, or not be funded?
If that's what happens, that's what happens.
Is there any further discussion, council? Motion.
So what is the motion now?
The motion is to remove the pole painting from the agenda bill.
Okay, this is a vote to remove that item.
Yeah.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
All right, it will be removed.
Okay, now back to the original motion. Hearing no further discussion, I'd like to call the question.
Second?
Question's been called. Oh,
And Mr. Mayor, just a point of clarification, because there were a lot of dates that went around. The CIP that the motion would amend is the 2015 through 2020 capital improvement / facilities plan that's shown on the city's website? Yeah.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
So Councilmember May, you're amenable to amending the motion to the?
Yes, that's what I intended.
All right.
There's a 17 through 2022, but that is the utilities CIP, so I just wanted to make sure
Thank you.
we're all thinking about the same document.
All right.
I want to call the question.
Council, on the original motion, the question's been called. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
All right, the question's called. We're now going to a vote with no further discussion.
We know you.
And this is the original motion with everything on the list with the exception of the polls, is that correct? Nothing else was pulled off?
Yes, just for clarification, we established offline that the Koinonia project and the Fisher project were already on the CIP list and therefore don't need to be added to it. They're already on it. So therefore, the three projects that we're adding are the ones that we're voting on.
Okay, so the only one, so council will not be raising any concerns if we proceed with those other projects that you said are on the CIP list, correct? Money's appropriated, already approved?
And it's on the approved project list, so.
Already budgeted, okay.
It's budgeted.
So the only project that essentially has been removed from all of this is
The polls.
painting some poles, okay.
So we're adding on, yeah, sorry.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion passes. CIP discussions coming forward, all right.
Point of order.
Yes, ma'am.
Were we supposed to have a public comment period for that?
We did have one. We opened it on that item. There was, I don't know, but I'm not going to have a public comment on every, if we had public comments on every motion and change, we'd be here all night long. So, but I did open it for public comment at the beginning of that agenda item. All right, moving on to Agenda Bill 19087, ordinance amending ordinance 1210 and 1213, adopting and amending the 2019 to 20.
we just did
I'm
that.
sorry, we just did that. All right, moving on to.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, sir.
So we're into community development matters, and we pulled an item off of the consent agenda. And do you want to take that first, or do you want?
We're going to get that when we get down to reports. We're now starting reports I'll get that under community development there, and I'll get the F&A ones under F&A.
I'm sorry, you're at Parks and Public.
So under reports, Parks and Public Works Committee, Agenda Bill 19081, Resolution 1502, determining the lowest responsive bidder, rejecting the bid of Rocky Bay Construction, awarding a public works contract to Green Slate Landscaping Incorporated for the Koinonia Park Improvement Project, which is now fully funded, and authorize the mayor to sign, or to execute the same.
RCWs establishes procedures relating to the awarding of public works contracts. The city advertised and received 5 bids for the project. The bid proposal submitted by Green Slate Landscaping, Inc. was the lowest responsive and responsible bid. City staff have checked references and otherwise determined that Green Slate Landscaping, Inc. meets the mandatory bidder responsibility criteria specified in RCW 39.04.350, parentheses 1, and any applicable supplemental bidder responsibility criteria adopted by the city of Snoqualmie. I guess I don't have to read that part. So move to adopt Resolution 15.02, determining the lowest responsive bidder, rejecting the bid of Rocky Bay Construction, awarding a public works contract to Green Slate Landscaping, Inc. for the Koinonia Park Improvement Project, and authorize the mayor to execute the same.
Second.
Motion and a second, as stated by Councilor Lissay, Agenda Bill 19081. I want to clarify if you're moving the substitute resolution, or?
I was reading the substitute resolution.
Okay. Just wanted that on the record.
Yep.
All right, is there any member of the public that would like to comment on this item prior to action? Seeing no one move forward, any discussion, council? All right, seeing no further discussion, all those in, Councilor Lissay.
Could we get a description of why Rocky Bay Construction was determined as unresponsive?
Rocky Bay had some inaccuracies in their bid documents, and when they heard the bid results, they got a little squeamish and requested that they wanted to withdraw their bid.
In addition, I think when staff checked their experiences primarily in custom home construction, and the supplemental responsibility criteria for this project required the bidders to demonstrate past successful construction of landscaping and/or park projects of similar size, complexity, and dollar amount. It did not appear that Rocky Bay Construction met those requirements, which would make them not responsible.
Okay.
Okay, any further discussion, council? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is carried unanimously. Wonderful. Community, any other report for Parks and Public Works Committee?
No report.
Community Development Committee, Agenda Bill, well, let me make sure I don't forget the other one first. We're going to go back up and grab the one off the consent agenda.
073.
Agenda Bill 19073, Third Amendment to the Riverwalk Phase 1 Design Agreement with Berger Partnership.
Under AB 16002 and AB 17067 and AB 18084, the city approved an agreement in the first 2 amendments for the Snoqualmie Riverwalk Phase 1 design and bid-ready construction plans with Berger Partnership for $848,875. The third amendment extends the contract end date. The contract costs are approved in Fund Number 313, Riverwalk Construction, and adopted in 2019 and 20. Recommend, move to approve the third amendment to the Riverwalk Phase 1 Design Agreement between Berger Partnership and the City of Snoqualmie, and authorize the mayor to sign.
Second.
Motion and a second, as stated by Councilmember Jeans. Is there any member of the public that would like to comment on this item prior to action? Seeing no one move forward, is there any further discussion, council? Councilmember Mayhew.
Yes.
Were you the one that pulled this off the agenda? Or? Okay, go ahead.
So the reason I asked to have this pulled, I just wanted to have a brief discussion, because I believe that the administration and most of the council members in agreement with what I'm about to say, but perhaps not. But I just wanted to have a brief discussion on this, which is, I think this is a fantastic project. I'm frustrated that it's taking as long as it's taking. And I don't like it being kicked out another year. I'm worried that the reason that this is being kicked out is because there are outside forces getting in the way of us moving this forward. And I think that to continue to delay is a mistake. I think this is very important to the city. I think it's very important to economic development, and I think we should be pushing forward faster. And so I'm in favor, I'm fine with, I'm not against lengthening the time on this, which is what this agenda bill is doing, if that's what we need. But I would really like to ask that the administration engage with the council if necessary, that whatever the roadblocks are, let's get those out of the way. Let's get this darn thing moving. This particular contract is just to get a design done. I think the reason we can't get the design done is we can't resolve a few things we have to design around. Let's get those resolved and get this project moving is really what I wanted to say. And I guess that's all I have to say on it.
Councilmember Jeans?
I would comment that we were probably pretty close to what I thought was going to be a constructive meeting between the city, the tribe, and the state agency that was very important to get their involvement in the case. And the individual with the state who was responsible for this, either his or her wife died a week before the meeting, and it got kicked out. And there have been some frustrations that we've had with trying to set up these kinds of meetings, but I don't think it'll take another year. I think it'll just take some more. I mean, we want this done the way you want it done. I mean, I agree with all the things you say, and we will endeavor to get this back on track and get those important meetings and come to an agreement on the phase one aspect of it that goes through the bottom of the parkway land, sort of from the bridge to the creek.
Councilmember Jeans, I just want to clarify, DAP did show up to the meeting. It was the tribe that failed to show or cancel at the last minute at the meeting we were having, so.
A lot of disagreement about who showed up and who died. I don't mean to laugh at that. But.
Well, I just know we were sitting in the offices with the DAP officials upstairs waiting for the tribe to come, and they had canceled like an hour before the meeting, so that's not in dispute. Councilmember Mayhew?
Well, if I could just ask, so for those involved in administration, particularly, is please come to us with any roadblocks now. Let's ask us to get involved. Right now, this has been pushed out a number of times, and I think administration is taking this on their shoulders, and that's great, and that is your job, but I think it's time for the council just to get more involved and help push this through, whatever the roadblocks are, political roadblocks are, rather than having you guys having to come ask for more extensions, more time. Let's get this done. Let's have the political will. I think the council has the political will to help you, so please give us status updates, ask us for more help, and I think it will step up.
Thank you.
Any other discussion, council? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is carried. 2 for 2 there. Moving on to Agenda Bill 19082, Economic Development Partnership between the Port of Seattle and the City of Snoqualmie.
The Port of Seattle Economic Development Partnership Program is intended to support local community economic development activities. Funding equivalent to the city's population is available, and the program requires the city to contribute a minimum of 50% matching funds. The city received $13,000 via this program to support this Snoqualmie Valley-wide marketing effort known as Savor Snoqualmie Valley. The city will provide $6,500 matching funds and $1,000 in in-kind contributions in support of Savers Snoqualmie Valley. Move to approve the Economic Development Partnership Agreement between the Port of Seattle and the City of Snoqualmie.
Second.
Motion and a second is stated by Councilmember Jean, on Agenda Bill 19082. Is there any member of the public that would like to comment on this item prior to action? Anna?
Anna Sotelo, 7117 Almond Avenue Southeast. So I guess it's going on 2 years. It'll be 2 years in November when this, this really became on my radar. And as someone with retail experience, and I guess I'm going to toot my own horn, the longest running restaurant with the original owner in Snoqualmie, there were a lot of concerns I had 2 years ago with this. The biggest one was that it wasn't fair for all businesses, and all businesses were not being mapped out in the same way. I was really concerned as well as that they did a best of on the 3rd of January. It was a very small window period, and also it was the kind of Google Doc that you could have done over and over and over and over and over again. The signs that were spelled out that they did, I walked those trails and I really didn't see them. So in my opinion, my concern is with, don't get me wrong, I think grants are a wonderful thing, but it kind of reminds me when I was in my Nordstrom Rack designer shoe sale shopping time. I would buy a pair of shoes that were originally $300 that were now on sale for $69.99. I didn't need the shoes, but because of that difference, I had the feeling like it was such a good deal, I had to do it. This isn't a good deal. This money, just the $6,500, it doesn't accomplish what we're trying to accomplish in your goal number one. And I think that $6,500 could go back in the general fund and be used to correct our signage, to do the little improvements that we've been parking lotted on the CDC committee meeting for so long. And I'd really like to discuss that versus just matching money without any real knowledge of what it's going to do for us. Does it really help us? To me, $6,500 is a lot of money for very little in return.
Thank you, Anna. Is there anybody else who'd like to speak on this item? All right, seeing no one else move forward, council, any discussion? Councilmember Shepherd.
So do we have any metrics as far as how effective this investment has been?
Jason Rogers with the Community Development Department. There are metrics in the agreement with the port. And so, because the port is very interested in this, and so they're listed, this starts on page, what is this, page 6 of 10 in the port agreement as to what the metrics are that they're measuring. In most cases, it's number of things printed, number of engagements, people talk to. I don't have the past year's ones immediately at hand, so I'm unable to answer that right now.
So as far as their activity, we don't know any way of measuring who's visited Snoqualmie as a result of that activity?
All I'm saying is I don't have the metrics from the prior years available in front of me.
Okay.
Jason, our match is coming out of LTAC money for tourism?
No, it's not coming out of LTAC. This is, it's coming out of Fund 130, the Community Development Fund. It was budgeted for this biennium.
Why would this not come out of LTAC, given its direct correlation to tourism? And I'm just curious.
Yeah.
Why hasn't this been presented? Or Mark, has this been presented to the LTAC committee and they didn't fund it, or what?
Mark Hoffman, Community Development Director. This is not LTAC eligible. This is a regional effort we entered into 3 years ago, specific with Jennifer McCune. It's entirely separate. I can't answer as to next year and their ability to actually apply to LTAC. The criteria there is essentially heads and beds on a regional level, whereas all the discussions with LTAC, Sean's not here, have been a little bit more specific to North Bend and Snoqualmie. So I won't speak to the future, but we know the past. They haven't applied. Separate effort that we fostered with Jennifer McCune and the Port Grant Program. It's been very successful, and we hope to continue it in the future.
All right, thanks, Mark. Councilmember Ross?
This is probably more of a specific question, but to the comment earlier, how do different services, businesses get on the list, on the map?
So in years past, the outreach was primarily, it was a combination of online via the Facebook page that Savor Snoqualmie set up, direct contacts from the then program administrator, Jennifer McHugh, and it's a different person from Mounts of Sound now, and an email list. One of the changes that is made in this contract versus the previous two, and it's in direct response to feedback we got both from Ms. Sotelo and from others, is it's listed here as training for, what's it called? Training for local business owners, because one thing we heard is that outreach was not sufficient. And so there's a small line item to add more direct contact with local business owners to make them aware of the various things Savor Snoqualmie Valley is doing to help get them engaged.
Thank you.
Councilmember Jeans.
I would say generally, it's a wonderful idea having the Port of Seattle interested in our valley, and I think it's a wonderful thing that we are included in North Bend, Carnation, Duval, and places in between there. There's a concerted effort, and I think the Port of Seattle wants this to be successful. And I believe the Port of Seattle would be receptive to the kinds of things that Anna has pointed out to us for a year or two now, that when they went about identifying businesses, they didn't do a good job. And I think that they'd be receptive to listening to us, the cities, telling them how they can do a better job.
Yeah, I think so. They're quite pleased with this project. They mentioned a number of times regionally when they speak about the grant program they're doing, so it's kind of one of the poster child projects for them too. But point well made, Bob. Any other comments, Council? Councilmember Holloway?
Point of clarification, total budget outlay for this is $6,500.
Technically, it's $20,000. Let's see, it's $19,500 because the port grant money will come to the city, and the city will then expend it out to Mounts of Sound Greenway Trust, who is our service partner on this. So there's an income, the grant, and then there's an expenditure directly from the city, which is just shy of $20,000 for this. It is budgeted.
When the word problem comes to the same answer as the math problem, it helps me out. I have a budget of 2050 and a word problem of 65, but all right. Understood. It'd be clear if those words were in there.
There's an in-kind contribution of $1,000, which is city staff time on
Understood.
one of the projects.
Call the question?
Second?
All right, question's been called. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
All right, so now we're back to the original motion, to vote on the motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
All right, moving on to Finance Administration Committee, we're going to go back up and grab the warrants and Agenda Bill 085. Approval of warrants as stated in the agenda packet. If I could have a motion in a second, please.
Move to approve the warrants as submitted.
Second?
All right. Motion and a second to approve the warrants. Is there any member of the public that would like to comment on these items prior to action? All right, any discussion, Council? Councilmember Shepherd.
So I still have questions that are not getting answered as far as warrants. And this week, we had about $40,000 in refunds on deposits that were made around 1999 and through 2006. And there's documents that support the original transaction were destroyed, and we don't have any ability to verify exactly what happened with that transaction. Trying to understand what our retention policy is regarding destruction of documents, and as far as I can see, the really, we are supposed to hold on to documents 6 years after the transaction is inactive. And as far as I'm concerned, if you have money you still owe somebody as a refund, then that transaction is still active. And I believe that we've destroyed documents that possibly should not have been destroyed. So I'm concerned about our process as far as record detention and the warrants. So I did receive an email back from the city attorney saying that I'm not supposed to ask questions that are audit-type questions. So this is going beyond what the Finance Committee is willing to entertain.
Well, let me first state, the staff did spend an extraordinary amount of time on that specific question, providing copious information to Councilmember Shepherd on this item. But staff, if you want to discuss, or I can have some of the staff respond.
Point of information before we get there. I need confirmation or information on destruction of documents.
Well, again, let the staff
Okay.
respond, and they'll speak to all that.
That we did send that information that was forwarded over to Councilmember Shepherd. And City Attorney Sturbank can elaborate on the
As
policy.
can the city clerk on policies, state requirements or policies around records retention. Councilmember Mayhew, do you want to add something for the staff response?
Well, we seem to be going off topic, and so I'm about to object to that as not being germane. Look, there seems to be a topic about whether or not some records were destroyed that shouldn't have been or not. That has nothing to do with approving, frankly, it has nothing to do with approving the warrants. So you don't get out of owing somebody money by destroying your own documents. If you owe them money, you owe them money.
Right.
So I'm not saying there isn't a valid question about document retention. I'm curious about this question as well, but it doesn't stop us from approving the warrants where our accounting records are clear that we owe this money. So we owe these people money, we paid them, and now we have to prove that that happened. I think the rest is not germane to that question. It's a separate question that deserves an answer, but not germane to this, in my view.
Councilmember Holloway.
Just for background for the entire staff, most of the questions were primarily around memos of understanding between us and developers, in which the practice of the city is, as a developer starts into a project, we actually ask them to prepay for fees such as plan review, occupancy inspection, whatever. And they prepay a certain amount at the close of the project.
That's recorded on a ledger.
That's recorded on ledger. At the close of the project, if there are funds remaining, those are due back to the original developer. There was a large chunk of these that went through. Staff did an audit and found remaining amounts outstanding, went and did their due diligence
On the ledger.
to identify those. And please let me.
Well, I just want to make sure the public
I may not-
understands.
I'm getting my point, but I may not be using all the words you want, but my point. Went back through to quantify the dollars amounts due to be returned, and went through the effort of returning those. Those were reviewed by both the department director, finance, and city manager. Okay? The memos of understanding were not attached. They did not necessarily need to be attached. It's administrative work on part of the staff. That was a determination of the F&A committee that the warrants were valid, money was due based on review, checks and balances were in place. We approved the warrants.
And any documents retention or destruction was all in compliance with state and city policy, to make that short and sweet. And then I would ask the city attorney to speak to the issue of that it's not the council member's job per Snoqualmie Municipal Code to duplicate the auditing officer's efforts in the city, or to act as an auditing officer on a daily, weekly basis. But if you could speak to that.
Sure. I sent several emails on this topic, some of which summarize the code history around the memoranda of understanding that Councilmember Holloway just described, and those were all entered into pursuant to Section 14.20.050 of the Municipal Code, which was adopted in 1996. that set up this deposit refund process that Councilmember Holloway described. And Mr. Hammoud and his staff Mr. Hammoud is the auditing officer as designated by the council, and his staff verified that and approved the warrants for recommendation to the council, and the committee has recommended them to the council also to be approved. The communication about which the mayor was referring to, as I did summarize the recent changes that the council also made to the warrant review process, and those describe when copies of the warrants and supporting documentation are made to the council for review. That's done prior to the F&A committee member, but that council member review is not to duplicate the detailed auditing review function, which is performed by Mr. Hammoud and his staff. And that's in the council's code language. That was not my language, but I was just providing that as additional background for how this process works. And I'm happy to speak to the record retention issue when council thinks it's appropriate. I do take the point that it's not germane to the warrant review question that's currently pending.
Councilmember Shepherd.
Is it possible for us to get an accounting of any more deposits that are due a refund that don't have the MOU has been destroyed?
It's not germane to the warrants on this agenda, Bill.
Okay.
Did you speak to the auditing officer?
I did.
Okay. Councilmember Ross?
Call the question.
All right.
Second.
Question's been called, motion is seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Okay, going back to the original motion on approving the warrants, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's carried. I want to make it very clear for anybody that ever watches the council videos, this is sort of a standard fare. On this issue, I reviewed all this documentation too. It was an exceptional amount of staff time that went into being very responsive. And I just, it's disappointing to have a council member continue to allege, even when she was given an appropriate answer numerous times, to cast dispersions on the staff or the council or administration in this regard. So just for the record, there was absolutely nothing done. Staff acted absolutely legally and appropriately in all matters here. So with that, we'll move on to Agenda Bill 19085.
085. All right. The council approved a consultative agreement with Agreement Dynamics Incorporated for an employee satisfaction climate survey. The survey is complete. Administration desires to enter into an addendum to the agreement to provide for a scope of work to assist with the rollout and implementation of the 2019 Employee Satisfaction Climate Survey. Move to approve the addendum to the agreement for consultant services for Agreement Dynamics Incorporated Employment Satisfaction Climate Survey. May I have a second?
Second.
Motion and a second to approve Agenda Bill 19085 as stated by Councilmember Holloway. Is there any member of the public that would like to comment on this item prior to action? See no one move forward. Any discussion, council? Councilmember Shepherd.
How much did we spend on the original agreement?
Not germane to the approval of the current amendment.
I'll allow it. It's still related to, I believe, I think Councilmember is trying to get the overall expenses of the investment in this process here, or in employees' satisfaction and climate. Go ahead, Bob.
I apologize, I do not have that figure in front of me.
Robert, do you remember that number right off the top of your head, or anybody else? And we don't have Deborah here tonight. I think she's on vacation. She was the one that led that project, so.
Be in the first exhibit.
First exhibit?
Is up there.
Can you pull up the first exhibit, please?
You should have a cost in there. Nope.
No.
Right there.
Unless any of the council member can find that quickly.
Says shall not exceed $21,000 plus printing costs.
That's about
I'm
what
sorry,
we
is it
spent.
21,000 for what was spent or what is going?
And it's asking for another 11,000 more.
Yes,
Okay.
that's correct.
On top of the 21?
Yes, that's about what we spent, yes.
Councilmember Shepherd, does that answer your question?
Yep.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Jody. Any other discussion, council? Or questions? Councilmember Mayhem?
Just a quick question. It wasn't clear in the budget section. I see how it's going to be allocated out, but that is within the approved budget for each of the departments that will receive a charge? A nod of yes is good enough?
Yes.
Okay.
All right. Any further discussion? Quick, Councilmember Lassay?
maybe I need a little more history of where this originated at, because I'm not really following, because it sounds like, it's like one of those surveys, I think it was in a movie or something that said, why are you surveying me about a car I just bought? So why are we surveying employees on their satisfaction if they're employed? I'd like to understand where we're headed with that.
In the beginning, no, several years ago, actually, for those who weren't currently on the council, the council, mayor and I expressed a very strong interest in obviously talking to our employees. We know that they enjoy being here for the most part. We also want to find out what we can do to improve the culture, the work environment, their working conditions if possible, get information from them to help us inform so we can make a better work environment overall. And that's what we've done. And now we need to follow up, and we need some experts who can help us take a look at these results, help us to evaluate those and analyze that, and also then talk to employees, put them into groups, depending on the elements that are coming forth in the survey, and talk to those folks about how helping us to obviously inform a better decision so we can move forward to help them obviously to enjoy their work more and also be making more productive, but also help create a better work environment again.
We don't want just the satisfaction survey to sit on the shelf. We want to take it a step further and create actionable items to actually do what we can to improve the working environment or respond to employee concerns, or work on areas of weaknesses and again, raise the bar. Councilmember Shepherd.
So I noticed that one of the steps that they're intending to take is to interview the department heads, and I know that we're missing a couple of department heads, and I'm just wondering how that's going to impact moving forward with this survey.
It will impact it, but not to the extent you would expect, I suppose. I'm concerned as well, but we'll have an interim IT director who will be on board helping us with this shortly. We also have the consultant, Ben Yazishi, who's taking over some of the work of the Public Works Director and Parks Director. We also have Brian Kraus, who's he's also helping out and assisting the day-to-day, so he'll be filling that role as well.
I was just thinking maybe we need to wait until we have those roles filled, maybe to.
We are not going to wait in this. This has to be done now, and it's very important. As employees have been waiting so long to get the survey done and to get the results and hopefully implement the results.
I think what Bob is suggesting is folks like Ben Yaziki that have years of experience being directors or managers or city managers in his case, can quickly kind of assess that environment, look at the employee survey we did, and I think provide very good feedback as any director would in those departments. So, Councilmember Mayhew?
I was just going to say, I think it's fantastic, and I commend you for doing this. I think this is one of the key sorts of things that an organization that's seeking to be high-performing does, is they seek out the input from their employees. There's all kinds of things they can tell you about how to do things better, and looking to get that information and act on it, I think is fantastic, and I commend you, and I'm all for this.
Thank you.
Any further discussion, Council? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. All right, I think we cleared up everything on the consent agenda. So back down to the regular agenda. Community Development, Agenda Bill 1908. Oh, I'm sorry, we covered that one. Any other items for Community Development Committee?
No.
All right, moving on to Finance Administration Committee, Agenda Bill 19067, Resolution 1501, adopting rules pertaining to requests for public records submitted pursuant to the Public Records Act, Chapter 42.56 RCW.
All right. All right. It would be the best interest of the city to adopt rules governing the process for requesting public records, responding to public records requests, and imposing such charges as allowed by law for the cost of providing requested public records. Move to approve Resolution 1501, adopting rules pertaining to requests for public records submitted pursuant to the Public Records Act, Chapter 42.56 RCW. May I have a second?
Second.
Motion and a second to approve Agenda Bill 19067, as stated by Councilmember Holloway. Is there any member of the public that would like to comment on this item prior to action? Richard.
Richard Seal, 6701 West Crestview Loop Southeast. I would first of all like to say strongly that 16 hours a week or a month is not enough. It has been mentioned that there are also the 8 hours a month from other departments, but many requests will not necessarily be distributed evenly across all the departments. And even though the number of requests and the scope of requests in recent years has been higher, a lot of that came as a result of a lot of distrust that's come up from the city, and it's important to respond to that by openness, not by closing off access to the public records. And again, I remind you of what it says in the state legislature's Public Records Act at the very top when it states the overarching purpose of it, and that is the people own the government. The government is there to serve the people. It is not the role of the government to tell people what they should and should not see and know about their own government. I would also like to say that I also strongly oppose the forbidding of cameras and phones, things like that. I completely disagree with the fact that it's so easy to modify things. You can modify them even if you get a printed copy. You snap a picture, you modify it. It's trivially different. There's no reason why you should not be able to have your phone there, snap a picture of records. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Is there anybody else who'd like to speak? All right, seeing no one else move forward, council, any discussion or questions? Councilmember Shepherd.
So I noticed that when we did the publication for the hearing, that it referenced something that wasn't available when it was published. It referenced today's agenda packet when it was posted, I guess, July 11 and July 17. I just wanted to put that out there. Also, looking at the one of the references for the the retention policy, the retention policy that's referenced in here the link doesn't work. And let's see. Yeah, that would be under section 4F. You have a link to the record retention policy. That link is not working. Okay, so going down to, it's confusing, section 5F. And there we have the section that Toby Nixon from the Washington Coalition of Open Government refers to as a concern as far as, having to make it, I don't know how it can be rewritten, but I would like us to work with the Coalition for Open Government to find out exactly how that can be phrased so that there wouldn't be a concern as far as that not being available to somebody who's possibly hearing impaired or has problem with English language. And then also section, let's see, 6G, identifying multiple requests by the same requester as far as the idea of indexing according to who is requesting the, making the request. I think that we need to be more sensitive to what can, how this might be abused. So I think that, we should not be targeting certain people to have a different rate of return as far as on their public records requests. And then paragraph O, let's see, sorry, same paragraph. Okay, inspection of records. The possession of cameras, mobile phones, laptops, etc. I feel that we should be able to bring mobile phones, and I think that it actually adds burden to our staff. Or if people would be able to take their own copies, then it would put less burden on staff instead of more. So I don't feel that this does not work toward taking that burden away from staff. I think it adds to the burden of the staff. And then section X, excessive interference. The number of hours, we really need to make that something much closer to one full 172 hours or whatever is reasonable. I think that if you put this down to only 16 hours and then you bucket it with, it can only be so many hours by one department or another, I think probably most of these hours will probably be coming from one department. So the spreading that, salting that across all the different departments that are never impacted by public records requests is not going to get you anywhere near the number of hours that we've been recently using as far as being able to produce those records. And as far as the actual cost of $67.57 per hour times the number of minutes, that's kind of awkward construction. I think we should have a per minute expense, and also looking at the city of Seattle, their cost per minute versus what this boils down to, our cost is about 3 times that of what Seattle is charging. So I think that we need to revisit that. That's it.
All right, thank you, Councilmember Shepherd. Councilmember Slee.
I want a bit of a clarification, maybe this is a question for the city attorney. When I read this, the way I read it, and if I'm reading it wrong, I appreciate being corrected, that this takes this role away from city council of providing rules and regulations around public records requests. Is there still oversight by council? Because the way it reads to me is that the mayor and/or city administrator is authorized to adopt reasonable administrative rules and implement those rules per this resolution. They can report them back to city council, but doesn't list city council as an advisory or check and balance, let's say. Is that,
That's
am I
just
read-
if there are additional administrative steps that are needed to implement all of these rules that are here. It doesn't take away the council's authority to adopt or amend these rules, which are the primary policy direction to staff about how the city should respond to records requests. So it's just designed to allow staff to keep up. The Public Records Act the act itself doesn't change, but the interpretation of it changes on a fairly rapid basis every time the appellate courts issue decisions. And so this just allows us to keep up a little bit better with if there are changes to dollar amounts or timing or things like that, just to implement this further.
I appreciate that.
It's not intended to take away the council's legislative authority.
So by including the rules in here, we're obviously going to comment on them. My question is then if those rules change in the future, do they come back for council for an additional resolution to implement?
Correct.
Okay.
It would be up to the council to make any amendments to these rules.
I'll let others speak before I bring up the thing I want to discuss too. So.
Go ahead. I might give
Unless
the
there's
city
somebody
attorney
else.
to respond to some of the comments that were made today.
Sure, and just in no particular order, the link to the retention schedule, when I pull up the packet and click on the link, it takes me right to the retention schedule on the Secretary of State's website. So at least as of now, it appears to be working. I don't know if it was not working previously, but I've just managed to do it a couple times here. The costs to upload, and there were some comments by members of the public and also Councilmember Shepherd about that hourly rate. The statute says that if we are going to adopt an actual cost for providing electronic records, it has to be based on Snoqualmie's actual cost. It can't be based on Seattle's or Everett's or another city. It has to be based on ours. There was a question about where does the 67 whatever per hour come from. That is a blended hourly rate, salaries plus benefits, of the 3 people who are most likely to do the uploading, and that would be the city clerk, the confidential legal assistant, Raina McCauley, or Mr. Larson's executive assistant, Tia Branson. And so that is the 67 and change hourly rate as an average of their 3 fully burdened salary and benefit costs. And as far as, can you set it and forget it when you upload documents, I was going to say their experience in uploading documents over the last year and a half, 2 years has been that you can't. sometimes it works flawlessly, many times it doesn't, and that you really have to babysit the uploading process to make sure that it works and that the links all get there and that they're openable by the person who is getting them. Obviously, if it all works flawlessly and it's done in 3 minutes, then it's 3 minutes. Some of these requests that have asked for emails going from 5 or 6 identified people going back 5 or 10 years, those are pretty, when we make installments or produce installments in response to that request, they're very large electronic files, and they can take a substantial amount of time. I think we provided the committee the data around responses to a certain tranche of requests so that the council could, and committee members could see the actual time spent, and that's what allowed us to do this. And that was an approach, I think, taken by the city of Shoreline as to how to calculate the actual costs. And so that's what we were following here and how we derived that model. And it's, just to be clear, it is not all of the time spent by either the city clerk or other people in finding records or redacting them or doing privilege review. It is only the actual cost of uploading them or putting them on a CD and mailing them, or if we have to make electronic copies and scan them. It's only that time involved in actually providing the records electronically or mailing them if it's done physically. So it may seem like a high hourly rate. It's the applicable one based on an average of the folks who generally do it. And as I said, it's limited to the actual time. I think there was a comment about multiple requests by the same requester and that people were going to be treated unfairly. The intention, and this is subsection G, I think it's 4G, was to make sure that people actually get equal treatment, and so that people who make multiple requests don't get to the head of the line and prevent other people who come in with 1 or 2 from getting a response for 6 months or a year. So it's just to be clear that if someone makes multiple unrelated requests and they come scattered over some time period, they'll be treated like everyone else and responded to in the order generally. But if they make multiple related requests, we might group those together and respond to that as one request so that we can then also respond to requests by person B, C, and D at the same time or in fairly short order thereafter. So it's actually, the purpose was the opposite of how it was perceived, at least by the folks who've commented on it. I think I addressed the phones and camera issue previously. The council can decide whether they're comfortable with the approach taken by the rule or not, and also the hourly limitation. And just in general, one other thing, that a comment that was made that we're not supposed to, by these rules, try to prohibit or limit access to the records. And again, I think there are several places where the rules announce our intention to provide the fullest possible response to requesters. But the city also has to balance its general operations against the time it takes to do that. These rules will not prevent requesters from getting records. They lay out, in general, all of the Attorney General's model rules. The things that we're primarily talking about here is what does it cost when we charge to upload, and how much time are we going to take, and how are we going to meter that out? It may be, in some cases, that fully performing the city's functions and providing records requests means one or the other takes a little bit longer, and that's what the rules are trying to balance here. But nothing in the rules, other than what's allowed by applicable law, is going to prevent a record from going out if it needs to be disclosed and if it's requested.
And quickly, we did double check the link that you said was broken, and it's working on Bob's computer anyway, so I'm not sure what's. Did you guys experience it working as well?
I just clicked on it, it worked.
Okay. Councilmember Shepherd?
So I would like to move that we remove Section 6O, the last sentence. Possession of cameras, mobile phones, laptops, tablets, or other electronic devices within such room where public records are made available for inspection is prohibited. I'd like to delete that.
That's a motion?
Yeah.
Okay.
Wait for a second, I want to read it. please.
I am
Okay.
hearing a lack of seconds, so
Yeah, so the motion unfortunately dies for lack of a second. Councilmember Mayhew?
Yeah, I'd just like to say, look, the topic of public records and the public access to those records is a very important topic that this council and everyone on it takes very seriously. I know I take it extremely seriously. It's a very difficult thing to do. It's unfortunately not as simple as just opening all the records. Even if that was not technically difficult, it is difficult for a lot of other reasons. For example, specific information about individuals that they're entitled to privacy on. So these records requests are not just simply a matter of someone just going and grabbing a bunch of documents, putting a pile, and here you go. It's a more involved process. So the challenge here is, how do we ensure access to the public to our records, but do it in a manner that that doesn't prevent the government from moving forward with its day-to-day activities. And the problem we have is, look, we've all seen it. We see the posts on public social media where people say, oh, I don't like something that a city employee said, so I'm going to get them. I'm going to file a public records access request for all kinds of information from their department and sort of punish them somehow. Now, I don't believe that's what most public records requests are. I think it's mostly people just trying to get their information. But the fact of the matter is that a whole bunch of requests have come to the city, and our staff is really struggling with this. So I think what's happened here is a reasonable attempt to try and make sure that we answer public records requests. Understand that no public record request gets turned down by this. It's just a matter of trying to balance the load. You might have to wait a little bit longer to get your record, that's true. We'll continue to monitor this. If there's any real problem that comes up in which people are not being able to access records, they're having to wait a long time, I'm sure that we'll take remedial action. But this seems like a very reasonable step. The other idea is that, well, you just hire more employees. Look, we have staff challenges right now. I know that our accounting department is struggling to get us a CIP. We spent a bunch of time talking about that earlier tonight. That's not because our people don't know what they're doing. It's because they've got a lot of work to do and they're just trying to get through it. So this is a reasonable step to try and put some limits around this access. A lot of people are trying to portray this as somehow restricting access or limiting access, or, you know, that is not what's going on here. Read these new rules. That is not what's going on here. Is it possible that there will be some way that some rule will play out that isn't what we see right now? It is possible, and we'll relook at it then. But I've read these rules in detail, and they seem reasonable to me, and a reasonable step for us to take, and I think it's the right thing to do. Look, every 1% increase in property taxes in Snoqualmie, which is our primary tax revenue source, only generates about $80,000. So you say, well, let's hire some more staff. Okay, you're saying let's increase property taxes by several percent. It's just, that's not the highest priority, I think, when the accounting department's struggling to get the CIP on, and it's not just them, it's the whole city is struggling to do what they can with limited resources. We're not that big a city. We're not a tiny city. We're not that big. So my sense is a very reasonable step to take, and I endorse this. I'm worried about it, just like I think we all are. Let's keep our eye on this, but it seems like a reasonable step to take at this point, so I'm in favor of it.
Councilmember Jeans?
I agree with all that Councilmember Mayhew has said. That there's only one part of this whole matter that has been explained, and we've had comments about. There's only one part that troubles me enough to say something, and that is, although there seems to be evidence that we are putting in over 100 hours by these key people who are on our staff, who are not low-skilled people. They're high-skilled people, and they have to be high-skilled people. And they're putting in over 100 hours of reviewing these kinds of things to get these public records out. But I'm a little taken aback by the reduction to an indication of 16 hours is more appropriate than what we've done. And I don't think taking 16 hours and taking 175 hours and splitting the baby down the middle, and that's the compromise. But I think we ought to do something other than 16 hours, because on its face, it is offensive. Even though we can justify it as a reasonable thing, it is, I think, offensive to the public generally. And I think we can do that by, I'm just going to suggest 50 hours that we should commit the staff to on a monthly basis, and that is in addition to the 50 hours, in addition to the amount that the department people would do. That would be 12 and a half hours a week of devoting time to that. I think that's a burden on the staff to do that, but I think the administration can maybe find ways to get around that, to free up maybe more than just those 3 people to do that kind of thing. So I would want to, I'd like to recommend a change of 16 hours to 50 hours per month.
All right, Councilmember Lissay and then Councilmember Holloway and Ross. Councilmember Lissay, before you make comments on this agenda bill, could you please make a motion to the time?
Oh,
wait a
I
minute.
get to now?
He's been dying for it all night.
Point of order.
I'm sorry.
So I've made a motion. Can I
I'm
ask
sorry.
can I ask for a second?
I apologize,
And then
Bob, I didn't hear the
discussion.
motion. I thought you were, okay.
Well, if you,
Could you restate the motion, please?
Change the 16 hours to 50 hours.
I motioned, that's why I didn't hear it. Could you say I motion to?
Motion to change 16 hours to 50 hours per month. I think that's enough I need to say.
Can I do a point of information before we vote?
I'm going to need a second on that.
I'm dying here.
All right, it's dying for lack of a second, Councilman
Okay.
Jean, so. Councilman Lissay, could you?
move to
please-
extend the meeting past 10 o'clock.
Thank you. We need a second. folks.
Second. See,
A
I'll
motion-
do a second.
Motion and a second to extend the meeting past 10 o'clock. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Is there no discussion?
Oh, I'm sorry. I should have offered discussion. There wasn't a call to question. Councilmember Mayhew, go ahead.
I just want to let the fellow council members know I cannot stay past 10. I have a son who's flying into the airport at 10 minutes after 10, according to the machine here, and I need to get down and get him by the time he gets his luggage. So I'm sorry I won't be able to stay much longer.
All right, so again, to the vote of extending the meeting past 10 o'clock, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed?
Yay.
Motion. Motion
I
is
just
carried.
want to vote nay on that one, I'm sorry.
So,
Councilmember Lissay.
so really quickly, Councilmember Jeans, I'm on the same page as you are. The one thing that really does bother me is that we've created this arbitrary, probably not capricious, but arbitrary determination of how many hours we should apply to this. And I work in a business that estimates hours all the time. And oftentimes we're wrong, and oftentimes we just have to balance. I'm more inclined to go down the path of removing any reference to how many hours staff should spend, but refer to it as non-essential staff hours. I think public records request responses are important. I think having the option to review those records and give people the option to see the public records is a valuable part of government. It's something that absolutely should be done, but to give it a limitation of specific hours creates just an arbitrary condition. And so I don't know how the wording should work. I don't know exactly, but I would really like us to find a way to have that be more geared around non-essential staff hours, where that if it happens to be 10 hours one week, but only 4 hours the next, or maybe 20 hours the next, it's when time will allow, because we do define in here, under the rules, how long it will take to respond to the different categories of public records. So if that takes 16 hours or 60 hours, it's a matter of how long does it take to respond. And that should be done on not to impact essential functions of government, but also not to not happen. So I'm trying to figure out how to craft that. So maybe if we can go through that conversation, and maybe that amends your motion slightly, or comes up with a motion that we go back to the one you had. I don't know, so.
Councilmember Holloway.
So that is 16 hours for the public records officer, and then 8 hours per department. We're up to 90 plus, which is comparable to other cities. Okay, in a brief discussion, it's comparable to what our sister city, North Bend, does. Okay, actually a little bit better, or well, I'm just going to say it's around the ballpark of what North Bend does. Okay. In response to Councilman Lusay's suggestion, I caution that this is in part a legal document, and at the whims of individuals can be subject to tort or to legal action. It is better that you state a definitive 16 hours, 8 hours per department, and you do more than that, then you set an arbitrary statement in there that you would then later have to defend in court if this were ever to go to court. Okay, so I would caution against getting vague in these, in that it is, subject to that kind of action. In this and all the other actions we do, we should be pretty specific so we can stand in court and say, this is what that means, not, in this case, it would drive us to, well, how much did you spend on essential hours and what was left, and did you devote that to public records requests? That's a pretty hard thing to go through in a court case. Okay?
Which is why I didn't make a motion.
Yeah, I hear you. And then I would also, on Mr. Mayhew, part of this also is a lot of these are subject of particular individuals or groups of individuals, and we need to protect the community at large to getting city business done and being able to answer other requests at large versus a minority or individual portion of this group. We've all seen these public record requests can in essence be weaponized for the sole purpose of causing logjam in city activities. It is our responsibility to protect that the city work gets done on behalf of the people, and that we can be responsive to the community as a whole, not to individuals. So that's my 10 o'clock gripe.
So if the discussion is done, maybe we'll give Councilmember Mayhew an opportunity to vote on this prior to him having to leave. Councilmember Jeans?
Recognizing that 16 hours doesn't mean 16 hours, with good explanations I've heard from 2 council members, but recognizing that 16 hours just doesn't sound right. So I would make a motion to increase that number to 30 hours. Can I have a second?
Realize this is just the city clerk's hours.
Right.
I prefer we get into it and see. We can adjust it.
What's
But
that?
I prefer we get into it and see. We can adjust it if it's not looking right.
Okay.
Right down the road.
So I'm sorry, Councilmember Jeans dies for lack of a second, as I think you already figured out.
I can live in that world.
And had the motion on the floor, I would be happy to have the staff explain how they calculated 16 hours as a reasonable number. But if there's no further discussion, are we prepared to vote? Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
No.
All right, motion passes. All right. Moving on to Agenda Bill 19086, citywide phone system upgrade and network switches refresh.
City needs to consolidate its telephony system in one platform and upgrade existing obsolete telephony hardware. This is a planned replacement. The price has been negotiated through Ambaya contract pricing via Department of State of Washington Department of Enterprise Services. The vendor will be SHI International. Move to approve a citywide phone system upgrade and network switches refresh with SHI International and authorize the mayor to sign a contract and purchase order to be approved by the city attorney. May I have a second?
Second.
Motion and a second is, for Agenda Bill 19086, as stated by Councilmember Holloway. Is there any member of the public that would like to comment on this item prior to action? Seeing no one move forward, any discussion, council? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Against? All right, motion passes. We're breaking records on unanimous votes here tonight. Councilmember Mayhew, thank you. Good luck with getting your son.
Thank you. Mayor, I just want to note that the IT staff is high-fiving in the back.
All right, congratulations, guys. All right, moving on to Agenda Bill 19088, interlocal agreement between the cities of Covington, Maple Valley, and Snoqualmie regarding funding for the Interstate 90 westbound on-ramp improvement project.
The interlocal agreement memorializes the parties' prospective financial contributions toward the design and construction costs of temporary improvements to the westbound Interstate 90 on-ramp and to provide conditions governing pro rata refunds of the same in the event that the improvements are not constructed. Move to approve the interlocal agreement between the cities of Covington, Maple Valley, Snoqualmie regarding funding the Interstate 90 westbound on-ramp improvement project and authorize the mayor to sign. May I have a second?
Second.
Motion and a second to approve Agenda Bill 19088, as stated by Councilmember Holloway. Is there any member of the public that would like to comment on this item prior to action? Richard?
Richard Shields, 6701 West Crestview Loop Southeast. I just have a minor technical thing. I had emailed it to Mr. Sturbank, but I don't know if it's been corrected yet or not, or if it can be corrected. But there is a clause in there that if the project for some reason got canceled, how each of the contributing cities would be refunded their pro rata share of the amount they put in. And unfortunately, it appears that it was calculated incorrectly. If, for example, if it was canceled right at day one, for instance, if no money had been expended, the other cities would actually get back more than they put in. So I believe that needs to be corrected. I don't know if that means, some addendum that gets negotiated since the other two cities have already signed this one.
Thank you, Richard. Did anyone see that, or can we take a look at that real quick, make sure we didn't do a technical error?
And my apologies, Mr. Shield, I'm just now seeing the email. I think it looks like it went into my junk mailbox. I think what he's talking about is we changed the contribution amounts for the city when the project cost went up. And that was corrected in the agenda bill to reflect the city's increased amount. The refund percentage didn't get recalculated in parallel, but in fact, there isn't going to be any. Because the other two cities' councils have already approved this, their staff indicated that they weren't prepared to take this back and just change everything again. They understand that there won't be a refund because if they're under our agreement with WashDOT, if there are cost savings, the additional funds paid to WashDOT will be devoted to the larger project. So there's a technical issue with the refund percentage as stated, but as a matter of practicality, there won't be a refund, so it will be moot. But I'm happy to correct it if council.
Of course, then we'll have to send it back to Covington and Maple Valley for approval of the corrected one, right?
Right.
Which paragraph is this?
Or first, is there any other member of the public that would like to speak to this item prior to action?
Maybe 4.
All right, seeing no one else move forward. Any discussion or questions, council?
Well, a moment, please. I'd like to look at the.
Yep, please do.
Section in question.
I can ask a question while he's looking at that, I assume.
I'm sorry, Councilman Slay?
If I can ask a question while
Yeah.
Councilmember Holloway's looking. It says contribution will be within 15 days of the date effective of this agreement. When do we anticipate that date to be? And will that follow a funding cycle that makes sense for the city to issue funds to WashDOT?
So the agreement that the council approved with WashDOT, in which they've now signed, they agreed at the tail end of our negotiations that they would bill the city after they incur, at the time they receive bills from the contractor who's building the project, that we would pay $35,000, which would be the city's share of design, I think within 30 days, and then thereafter, all of the payments would not be due until they were billed by the contractor and then in turn bill the city. So this timing with respect to when we receive funds from Maple Valley and Covington will work fine.
Okay, because it's, yeah, I guess I read it a little
Right, at the time, at the outset, when.
But Covington and Maple Valley owe us, well, their contributions are due
Soon.
within 15 days of signing this agreement.
Correct.
So they have to turn that around quickly, then we pass it on to WashDOT under the other memorandum of understanding.
Correct, after we're billed by WashDOT, when they incur the costs. Again, part of the reason for this is that the things changed. We came to a staff understanding on these agreements, sent them off to Covington and Maple Valley. They routed them through their process, which took some time. In the meantime, negotiations with WashDOT went on longer and resulted in changes in the price, but also more flexible terms as far as when the city has to pay.
So of issue here, as Mr. Shield has brought up, is really pro rata share of 9.9% each for any refund received from WashDOT. There is potential, Meyer, that WashDOT would say no, right from the get-go. And at that stage, we would have to refund.
We would just refund the contributions from Covington and Maple Valley because the way the agreement was finalized with WashDOT, the city will not have paid WashDOT
Right.
before they make a go, no-go decision on the project.
So
They'll get bids in and decide whether to proceed or not.
What would be the issue of just removing of 9.9% each from that paragraph? They receive their pro rata share.
The only issue is the delay of having to send it back to their respective councils for a new vote.
Can we handle that as a separate communication that says our understanding of section 4 is just pro rata share versus a strict 9.9%?
Or just-
Second, outside of
I
this?
think we've already done that
Okay.
via email, and their understanding is that if the project proceeds, there won't be any refunds.
So it's already been documented or captured in emails, correct? Yeah.
Okay.
To both cities.
To both cities, correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, which, again, maybe not a big item, but anytime you want to risk opening up a conversation where they might reconsider and not want to fund the project would make me a little nervous, but. Councilor Ross?
I'm glad that they both signed it, and it's great that we're moving forward on this.
Yeah, thank you. All right, if there's no further discussion, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. We're breaking records tonight. All right, any other report for the Finance Administration Committee?
Not at this time of night.
All right, Public Safety Committee, any report?
Nope, not tonight.
All right, Committee of the Whole. It's getting so late, I can't remember if we did add anything to Committee of the Whole.
No, we did not.
All right. Staff reports are verbal, second meeting of the month. However, at this time, is there any other reports from staff? I'm going to say no, there's no reports, right, everybody?
There better not be, excuse me. Just teasing.
All right, so at this time, we're going to go into an executive session regarding the potential litigation pursuant to RCW 42.30.110, Section 1II, and ask that Bob Larson, Bob Sturbank, Mark Hoffman remain. The executive sessions are anticipated to last about 30 minutes, and there may be action following. Everyone else gets to go home. So.
Actually, Mayor, I think we can excuse Mark Hoffman as well.
Okay. That's fine.
Run fast, Mark.
Amy.